Hello, glad to see you on my channel. I really value it. And today I want to share with you a wonderful story. It's a dramatic story that will come as a total shock to everybody. It is a really amazing story. So enjoy watching it.
Having colored the last cloud, 5-year-old Maria looked at her drawing once more and smiled dreamily, and then went to the kitchen where her mother was preparing dinner. "Mommy, I drew you a picture," she told her mother, holding out a piece of paper. The woman smiled and, having washed her hands, sat down on a stool. "Let's see," she said to her daughter, taking another masterpiece from her hands. "Well, tell me who you have depicted here." The girl came to the table and, showing with her finger one by one all the people and animals depicted by her, began to explain to her mother who is who. "This is you, Mommy. This is Daddy. This is my big brother. This is me. And this is my little sister. And this is our cat and dog." A happy smile played on the child's lips. Selena stroked her daughter's head and smiled a little sadly. She had given birth to Maria at the age of 25 to a man she loved very much, except that it turned out that his plans were not to become a father, and having learned of Selena's pregnancy, he urged her to have an abortion, putting her in front of a choice. And Selena made her choice. Having collected all her things, she moved in with her mom, and they never saw Maria's father again. "Is it beautiful, Mommy?" asked the girl, looking at her mother. "Very beautiful," Selena answered. Maria had long dreamed of having a big family. She watched with sadness when fathers played with children on the playground. They sat on their shoulders, caught from the slide, swam on the swings and together in the sandbox molded dolls. The girl believed that one day she too would have a father, and also an older brother who would protect her and help her do her homework, and a little sister whom she would take care of, and when she grew up, she would become her best friend. There were no animals in their house because her grandmother was allergic to wool, and Maria, like any child, dreamed of a pet. But she didn't know who she wanted more, a cat or a dog, so in her drawing she depicted both, believing that one day she would have them. Selena had been working at the neighborhood dentist's office for 10 years. She liked her job, but for the past few months she had been going there as if it were hard labor. Relations with the new head of the department did not work out, but not hers alone, and she was already looking for a new place. And an unexpected call from a former colleague set things right. "So, come to us," said the woman, having listened to Selena's complaints. "We need a doctor right now, and you have good experience." "Veronica, I'd love to. Are you sure they'll take you?" Selena immediately perked up. "Of course she will. I'll put in a good word for you." Veronica had been working in a private clinic for a couple of years and was happy with everything. She called Selena back the next day and told her she could come in for an interview tomorrow. The owner of the clinic, Alexander, carefully read all the documents and looked at Selena with a smile. "Well, welcome to us," he said. "When are you ready to start?" Selena smiled back. "I have to work 2 weeks at my old place, but I could start working here on my days off," she replied. "Why the weekend? Work your ass off and then come back after you're fired." Selena walked home with a happy smile on her lips. The schedule was better here and the salary was twice as much. 2 weeks flew by quickly, and she was happy to start working at the new place. "How do you like it here?" Veronica asked after a week. "I like it very much." "Veronica, thank you very much." Selena looked at her friend with gratitude. "That's great." Veronica smiled enigmatically. "And our Alexander obviously likes you," she said. "How do you know that?" Selena asked. She hadn't noticed anything like that, although she liked her new boss. All she knew about him was that he was 37 years old and loved his job. He was an interesting man, and Selena had no doubt that he was married, even though he didn't have a wedding ring on his finger. "I've seen the way he looks at you. I'm telling you. We'll marry you off," Veronica said. "Isn't he married?" Selena asked immediately. Details of his personal life I do not know, but he's been divorced for 3 years. The only thing is that he has a son, Slavka. You'll see him sometime. Alexander sometimes brings him to the clinic. He seems to be a normal kid, 10 years old. Maybe that's why he didn't marry again. Not everyone needs husbands with children. Selena understood that perfectly well. She'd had several affairs over the years, but no one was in a hurry to marry her, not wanting to take care of her daughter. Veronica had been right, and a romance began between Selena and Alexander. "Maria, tomorrow we go out not alone with you, but in a very pleasant company," Selena told her daughter one night. "And with whom?" she asked, looking at her mother curiously. "Remember, you always wanted to have a father and an older brother." Selena smiled, because today Sasha had proposed to her, which she had gladly accepted, finally feeling happy for the first time in so many years. "And we'll go out with them?" the girl asked excitedly. "With them," Selena replied. "Mommy, will we have a little sister and a cat and a dog too?" "Well, they have a cat," said Selena, "because just recently Alexander bought a kitten. As for the rest, I can't say yet." Maria was looking forward to Saturday. She found her old drawing and began to look at it. "Thank you, Santa Claus," she said. After all, she had written him a letter for New Year's Eve, not asking for toys, but asking him to fulfill her long-held dream of a big family. On Saturday, Maria quickly ate her breakfast. She couldn't wait to go to the playground, where her future father and brother would be waiting for her and her mom. The man sat down and handed Maria a box containing a large brown puppy that could walk and bark. "Hello, Maria," he said, smiling good-naturedly at the girl. "Your mom said that you dream of having a dog. Of course, it's not a real one, but we'll be sure to get a live puppy later too." Honestly, the girl asked excitedly. "Of course, honestly," replied the man. "We'll take a walk now, and then we'll go to our house, and you'll play with Caramel." "And she is small?" asked the girl. "Very small. I'll show her to you now." The man took out his phone and showed Maria a picture of a kitten. And the girl glowed. "She's so pretty," she said. Alexander got up and called his son, who was running around the playground with the boys. "Tony, come here." The boy came over to them. He didn't look happy. "Tony, this is Maria. I told you about her." "Hi," he said nonchalantly, turning to look at the running boys. It was obvious that he wanted to run with them, and he wasn't interested in his newly baked sister. "Hi," Maria answered, a little upset. "Dad, can I go?" he asked, looking at his father. "Go," said, and looked at Selena. "Slavka is not a gift, but I hope you get along with him." Maria was swinging on the swing, looking with genuine adoration at Alexander, who was swinging her. She thought that all her dreams were bound to come true. After the walk, they went to a cafe, where her future father bought her a very tasty ice cream, and then all together went to visit Alexander and Tony, where Maria was not torn away from Caramel. She was not even upset by the fact that Tony did not want to communicate with her, closed in his room. Selena and Alexander got married, and Maria moved into a new spacious apartment where Caramel was waiting for her. She was completely happy with her new life, unlike Tony, who continued to ignore her, as well as Selena, who was trying hard to make the child feel comfortable. "Tony, let's have tea. I made your favorite muffins." Selena walked into her husband's son's room. "I don't want any," he said without taking his eyes off the computer game. It had been several months since the wedding, but the boy's attitude remained the same. "He doesn't accept us," Selena said to her husband one day, sighing heavily. "He will. Give him time," replied the man, hugging his wife. The man himself was worried, repeatedly tried to talk to his son, but he only replied that they were complete strangers to him and he did not want to communicate with them at all. Tony did not conflict with neither Selena nor Maria, but just tried to pretend that they did not exist. But as time went on, he softened a little towards his new family. "Why are you crying?" One day he came into Maria's room when he heard her crying. I have a test tomorrow and I don't understand anything. I for homework put a day, sobbing, said the girl. Well, show me what you don't understand, he said, sitting down next to her. Here. Maria put the math book in front of him and showed him the examples she couldn't solve. How easy it is, he said, and began to explain how easy it is to solve. Algebra was very difficult for the girl, while her new brother grasped everything on the fly and was an excellent student, unlike her. Maria listened attentively, trying to understand. They solved a few examples together, and she began to understand more or less what she couldn't understand at all. Thank you, the girl said gratefully. It's okay, you're welcome, he replied. Tony, why don't you like my mom? She's nice, isn't she? Suddenly Maria asked. I like her, the boy answered, smiling a little. He left the room, and Maria looked at him and smiled. She realized that Tony had finally accepted her and her mother. Now all that was missing for her complete happiness was a little sister and a dog. She's so tiny, Maria said, standing by the crib and admiring her newborn baby sister, Yulia. You were like that too, said Selena, hugging her daughter with one arm. Nice. Tony smiled at Selena. I agree, she replied, ruffling his hair. And while she's sleeping, come on, I'll feed you. They quietly left the room, shutting the door as Buddy, their 1.5-year-old beagle dog, immediately rushed at his feet, wagging his tail and twirling happily. You little bully, said Maria, petting the dog. We should take him for a walk. Selena looked at the children. Let's wash our hands, eat lunch and go for a walk. After a quick lunch, the children picked up Buddy and headed outside, and Maria thought that dreams are bound to come true if they come from the heart. I can't wait to get rid of him, Maria sighed, looking at her friend Sarah, with whom they were preparing for the final exams together. And don't tell me, she replied, puzzling over a physics problem. You and I will never solve this abracadabra. When is your brother coming? She looked at her friend. He should be here any minute. Only you ask him, or he will start to attack me again, that he studied for me all these years, Maria said. Tony graduated from school with a gold medal, and she had a few C's for the last year, and one of them was in physics. Since Tony had moved out, her grades had dropped dramatically. When Maria heard someone coming, she went out into the hallway, and there stood Tony, with Nancy hanging around his neck. You're going to strangle her, he said, smiling at her sister, and she unclasped her arms and stood on the floor. Hi. Maria walked over and pecked her brother on the cheek. Sarah looked out of the room and waved at Tony, rewarding him with a smile. Are you studying for your exams, you two-timers? He asked Maria, smiling. With a pleading look in her eyes, the girl looked at her brother. No, and again no. Come on, girls, turn on your brains and yourself, he replied. Please, literally begged Maria, and Sarah put her hands together and brought them to her face. She looked as if the world was about to end. Tony sighed and shook his head disapprovingly. What's there to do with you? I'll just eat first. Why don't you heat up something tasty for me? I'm on my way, Maria answered cheerfully. Sarah, let's go to the kitchen. She smiled at Tony and followed Maria. Well, I'm going for a walk with Buddy, said Nancy, and went to her room to change. Tony left, and satisfied girlfriends, having tea, settled down on the sofa in Maria's room. Maria, I like your brother, Sarah confessed to her friend. Is he seeing anyone? His personal life is shrouded in fog, Maria said with a laugh. Anyway, he hasn't brought anyone here. I think he likes me too. Sarah smiled dreamily. Help me to have an affair with him. How can I help you? Maria asked. Well, we should go out together, maybe to a club. I think that could be arranged, she said. Thank you, Sarah chuckled. What about you and Max? She asked. Maria met Max 4 months ago. He was in his 3rd year at the institute and was 3 years older than Maria. They met, and she liked the young man very much, except that he constantly hinted at intimacy, and the girl was not ready for it. I don't know. Everything seems fine, but he's always hinting at a cupcake. I understand him, but I'm not ready yet. I confessed to my friend Marie. Well, what's a relationship without that? If you're going to keep him, he'll find someone more agreeable. Maria understood that. You're right. We need to make up our minds, she answered, sighing. Do you love him at all? Sarah asked. I think I do. Do you or do you? Maria thought for a moment. She liked Max a lot, but she didn't know if it was love. She had two men in her life whom she thought were perfect, and she didn't know Max well enough to know whether he was the one she wanted or not. She also realized that there was no relationship without intimacy, but something inside her told her not to hurry. How long are we going to hold hands? Disgruntled tone asked Max in their last meeting. I'm not ready yet, Maria answered honestly. Not yet. And how long do we have to wait? Listen, Maria, this is a kindergarten, not a relationship. Understand, but I'm not satisfied with this. Let's meet at my place on Saturday. We'll sit down, have a drink, and... He smiled enigmatically. I can't on Saturday. Maria had no plans, and the words came out of her lips. Max gloomed. Sunday? He asked. I don't know yet. Maria shrugged her shoulders. Maria, I thought you were a grown man, and you're acting like a juvenile dynamo. You're rushing me. Max, I've never been with anyone before, so it's not easy for me to decide. She admitted it. Look for yourself. But I'm no longer satisfied to walk hand in hand and kiss in your entrance. Max made it clear that he was ready to end their relationship if it didn't go to the next level. All she kept thinking was that she had to make up her mind and that she should have spent Saturday with him for nothing. Maria, what's up? Let's go clubbing on Saturday. Would Tony agree to go? Sarah asked. I don't know. I don't know if he has a girlfriend or not. I'll ask him, but I can't guarantee that he'll go. After seeing Sarah off, Maria immediately called her brother. Hi, long time no see. He answered his sister's call with a smile. Tony, come with us on Saturday to the club, Maria said right away. With you? Well, with me and Sarah. You can bring a friend or two. Don't you have your own company? He asked. Sarah likes you. I didn't tell you that. I know. Tony answered coldly. And nothing. So you're not going to the club without me. No offense. Shit. Tony, what's wrong? Maria's been thinking. She seems like a nice-looking girlfriend. You got a girlfriend? I don't have one right now, but that doesn't mean Sarah will. Don't pry. If you say no, it's no. What if it's just for company? I don't want to. I had plans on Saturday, so no clubs. That's a shame. Bye then. Maria sighed and collapsed on the bed. Sarah will be upset, she thought, but for some reason she was glad that her brother didn't like her friend. With Max, Maria agreed to spend Sunday, and on Saturday, she went to the club with Sarah, who had a friend of her sister's working there, and thanks to him they went quietly, despite their age. Her parents let their daughter go with a squeak, but she said she was going with a large group and not until the morning. After an hour of dancing, Maria noticed Max and her heart froze in her chest for a moment and a lump came to her throat. Her boyfriend was making out with some girl, obviously older than him, dancing a slow dance with her. His hands were stroking the girl's ass, and Maria suddenly laughed hysterically. A shoal, said Sarah, watching her friend's boyfriend, and it's a good thing it didn't come to a cupcake. Sarah, we agreed that tomorrow we would spend the day together, and everything else was implied, Maria said, and a tear ran down her cheek. It's good that it turned out that way. I didn't like Max, you know. I just didn't tell you, Sarah confessed. Let's go to the bar. I'm thirsty, said Maria and brushed a tear off her cheek. Maybe we shouldn't, Sarah asked, looking at her friend with sympathy. We should. Maria headed towards the bar. She felt so bad now that she wanted to get drunk and forget herself. The most she'd had before was a little champagne on New Year's Eve. But here she ordered a whole shot and drank it alone. "Maria, are you crazy?" Sarah groaned, noticing that her friend was dramatically intoxicated. "I'm fine," she replied and asked the bartender to repeat the shot. "Where to?" "Pull over." The girl looked at the bartender and turned to him. "No more, sorry." She took her drunk friend under her arm and dragged her toward the club's exit, hailing a cab on the way. "Tony's address," she said to Maria. "It's close by." Maria mumbled and rested her head on her friend's shoulder. "They're all such assholes. Dogs. I hate them." "Aha. Give me your brother's address. You can't go home like that." "My parents would kill me," Sarah said. "There." Maria waved her hand to the left. Sarah sighed and took her friend's cell phone out of her purse. Finding it in Tony's contacts, she called him and told him that she was bringing Maria to him now. What a gift. Tony was standing near the entrance when Sarah got out of the cab and then helped Maria, who was barely on her feet. "Here you go, sign your name," Sarah said. "Tony, please don't say anything to your parents." "You're sober, Maria's wasted." "How so?" he asked, supporting his sister by the waist so that she did not fall. "Oh, Slavka. Hi, what are you doing here?" asked Maria, smiling stupidly. "I'm going home, and you bring her to her senses, please." Sarah got back in the cab. "Come on, alcoholic." Tony smiled and headed with Maria towards the driveway. "You're all such assholes." "Tony, tell me, are you a dog too?" "Hey." Maria stopped and looked into her brother's eyes. "Of course I am. Go on." He led his sister to the entryway again and pulled out a key with his free hand. "Here, you. You don't know how to love at all. All you want to do is fuck, nothing else." "Aha." Tony agreed with her and opened the door. Maria staggered into the entryway and immediately sat down near the radiator, covering her head with her hands. "Get up." She sat up. He said and stood across from his sister. "I cannot," Maria answered quietly. Tony lifted her off the floor, took her in his arms, and called the elevator. "You'll get the belt for sure," he said as he stepped into the elevator. "Whatever." Maria yawned widely. "I'm dizzy." "Really? Tomorrow you'll tell me why you got so drunk, you disgrace." Outside the apartment, Tony set his sister on her feet to open the door, then helped her take off her shoes and led her into the bathtub, where he turned on the cold water and began washing her face. "It's cold. My makeup will smudge." Maria was indignant. "Isn't it too early for you to put on so much plaster and get so drunk?" Angrily, he asked and turned on the warm water to better wash the makeup off Maria's face. "It's the circumstances," Maria replied with a slurred tongue. "What are they?" Tony asked. "Max, the bastard. I saw him with some girl. He was making out with her and mashing her ass. And I'm an idiot. I was gonna give it to him tomorrow." Maria sighed heavily and cried. "Who is Max? Are you going to have sex with him?" Tony turned off the water, took Maria by the shoulders, and gave her a good shake. "Look at me," angrily he said, and Maria immediately quieted down and timidly looked into her brother's eyes. "Are you a fool? Isn't it too early for you to grow up?" "I thought he loved me," Maria answered with a sniffle. "We'll talk later." Tony took a towel and began to wipe her face. "Now you almost look like a human again." Maria got to her feet. She felt dizzy and her eyes were double-visioned. Suddenly she felt a bout of nausea and covered her mouth with her palm. Tony took her to the bathroom without a word. "Next time before you get drunk, remember this, maybe it'll stop you," he said, holding her hair back. Mary felt a little better. Washing her face again, Tony took her into the kitchen and turned on the kettle. "I'll call my parents now. I won't tell them about your state of incapacity, but we'll talk to you again tomorrow," he said and dialed his father, naturally waking him up with the call. Tony said that Maria would spend the night at his place and that they would be there for lunch tomorrow. Then he poured chamomile tea for his sister, and after she drank it, sent her to bed. "Tony, lie with me till I fall asleep," Maria said sadly, covering herself with a blanket. "Shall I tell you another story?" Tony turned off the light. "Please," Maria asked. "Are you feeling better?" Tony asked and lay down next to his sister. "Okay, not so much," she answered and laid her head on his chest. "Why is everyone like this?" She yawned and closed her eyes. "Everyone is different. It's too early for you to sleep with men," he replied, looking up at the ceiling. "That's not the point. He was with someone else, and we were supposed to meet tomorrow. It's disgusting. It's good then that I saw today. I didn't make a big mistake. That Max doesn't love you, so you don't need him. Go back to sleep." Tony fixed the blanket. "I'm gonna go in the other room. I'm sleepy too." "Nah, wait till I fall asleep." "Tony, why don't you have a girlfriend?" Maria yawned and put her palm under her head. "It's too early for me to think about relationships, so nothing serious," he answered. "But there is not serious." "Sure, enough of that. My personal life is my business." "You're all the same," Maria sighed sadly. "Men are a little differently organized than women. I think you know that." "Maria, go to sleep. I'm already passing out." Tony yawned and closed his eyes. It was not a good morning. Maria opened her eyes and let out a slight groan. She was thirsty and had a headache. "Tony," she moaned, but her brother didn't hear her. She got up from the bed and pulled Tony's t-shirt out of the closet. Putting it on, she went into the kitchen. "I'm awake. Doesn't your head hurt?" he asked, putting the phone away. Bo, and I'm thirsty." Maria poured herself a full glass of water and drank it almost in one gulp. "Here, I went to the pharmacy and bought you some magic pills." He handed her a packet of hangover pills. "That's cool. Thank you." She swallowed one right away. "You want breakfast?" Maria went back to her room and got her cell phone out of her purse. While she'd been asleep, she'd gotten a text from Sarah, a friend, asking how she was feeling, and there was also a message from Max. "Hey babe, what time should we meet tonight?" he texted. "No, we're not. Go see the girl from the club." Maria replied and blocked his number, then headed back to the kitchen. "Tony, just please don't say anything to your parents," she asked her brother. "I wonder if you promise it's the first and last time," he answered. "I promise. I've had enough. I hope you'll send Max away." "I already did." "Good for you. You should be thinking about your exams and how you're gonna get into your vet school. I'll study with you, of course, but just do your best, please," said Tony. "Really? Will you help me?" "Of course I'll help you, but I won't take the exams for you." "Thank you. When do we start?" "We'll start next week." "Are you sure you're going to go to veterinary school?" "Yeah, teeth aren't my thing." "You're running away from your family." Tony smiled. "I'm sorry about that. Do you really want to pick your mouth?" "I'm going into prosthetics. It's a very good, high-paying job. Veterinarian's not bad either." "No argument there. I'm kind of hungry." Maria felt her stomach rumbling. Scrambled eggs. What a choice." The girl smiled. "Well, I'm not a cook." Tony took cheese, eggs, and sausage out of the refrigerator. "Eggs and sausage and a cheese sandwich," Maria replied. The day was sunny, and after breakfast Maria offered her brother a little walk in the park, which was not far from his house, and then go home. As promised, Tony didn't tell his parents anything about Maria, and from the next week, he began to study with her every night, and in the end Maria got on the budget, which was celebrated by the whole family in the restaurant. Max quickly got away from her, and the girl was glad that everything turned out so. After all, if she had not seen him by chance in the club, she would have made a big mistake. Now her short-lived romance with Max was a lesson for her, and Maria decided that only for a great love she would give all of herself to a man. In fact, that was her next desire to find. Okay, let's get some flowers first. Today was Selena's birthday, and it was decided to just sit down tonight as a family. What are you getting, Mom? Maria asked him. A secret. Tony smiled enigmatically. Oh, come on, I'll say it anyway. When I give it to you, then you'll see. Are you coming to the club with us on Saturday? I could. Carlo's been dragging his feet. He really likes your Sarah. He wants to keep seeing her. Is he all right? Sarah liked you in general. He's okay. You know him. I don't think your girlfriend still likes me. She does. I know she does. Maria, this subject is closed. Tony parked outside a flower store. After choosing a beautiful bouquet, they drove to the house, chatting about Maria's studies and Tony's work, without touching on the topic of liking anymore. Mom, happy birthday. Tony handed Selena the bouquet and then pulled out a long velvet case containing a gold bracelet. Well, you've made me golden today. Selena smiled and then hugged Tony and Maria in turn, kissing each on the cheek. Her husband had given her diamond earrings. Maria had given her a gold zodiac sign pendant from this morning, and here was a bracelet. Come on into the kitchen. I didn't cook anything. We ordered everything from an Italian restaurant. Father and younger sister were already sitting at the table, waiting only for them. Maria loved it when they gathered like this, their friendly family, cheerfully discussing everything that could be discussed. Saturday. Sarah smiled strangely at Carlo, knowing full well that he sympathized with her, but she was still very fond of Tony, who'd paid no attention to her. Even the slow dance he preferred to dance with his sister rather than her. Sarah doesn't like your friend. During one slow dance, Maria said, watching her friend. If she doesn't, she doesn't. No one is forcing you to. Tony replied indifferently. Are you still not ready for a serious relationship? Maria, you like to serve. Tony smiled without answering her question. Here I have no one likes me, I do not date anyone. What's there to hide? And you're all about secrets. You could have told me. We used to tell each other everything, but now you're distant. Distant? We see each other almost every day. What can I tell you? I just started working. I'm not in a serious relationship. Are you happy? Are there any non-serious ones? Maria didn't give up. I'll bite you. You're so clingy. I had some. But it's over now, answered Tony. Is the girl that bored? That's it. Stop torturing me about my personal life. The fast music started again and their conversation stopped. After a while, Sarah thought a bit towards Carlo and then even admitted to her friend that he was okay. Anyway, after the club, they took a cab to her house because it was too far to see her off on foot. My place? Asked Tony to Maria. Come on, it's closer to you. She agreed. When they got to the floor, Maria was the first to notice the girl standing outside her brother's apartment. What are you doing here? He asked, and Maria realized that Tony was not at all happy to see this overnight guest. Who is it? The girl glared angrily at Maria. None of your business. Get away from the door. Tony pulled out his keys, but the girl blocked his way. Who the hell is this little girl, I ask you? She shouted. Get out of my way and get out of my way, said Tony, coming almost right up to her. So this is what you traded me for? She grinned, casting a scornful glance at Maria. We didn't have the kind of relationship that would make you throw tantrums at me now. I see what's wrong with you. She shifted her gaze to Maria. And to you, girl, I want to tell you that you shouldn't get involved with this dog. He'll find a replacement in no time. She threw a hateful glance at Tony and then went to the elevator. Shall we go to sleep or watch a movie? Tony asked when they were in his apartment. We could watch a movie, so you dumped her. Stopped seeing her. I didn't expect her to come over. We weren't serious. She didn't seem to think so. Maria answered and went to the kitchen. She had voiced that she didn't want a relationship when we started dating. She was interested in meeting and having a good time. Maria, I'm not a monk, and I was fine with it. And then it started. Well, when one is no longer satisfied with the format of a relationship, one should break up. I don't get it. I'm against it. Maria looked at her brother with judgment. You're right to be against it. Let's go to the room to choose a movie. Having settled down on the bed, they began to watch the latest movie. Maybe a mystical thriller? Asked Tony. No. Not soaps. And not a horror movie. Comedy. I could do that. Opting for a comedy they both hadn't seen, Maria and Tony made themselves comfortable and stared at the big TV hanging on the wall in front of them. Opening her eyes, Maria realized that she was actually lying on top of Tony. Her head was resting against his chin, and one of his hands was resting on her back. She froze for a moment, then slowly raised her head to see if he was asleep. He was asleep. Apparently, they'd both passed out without finishing the movie. She decided and gently removed his hand before sliding off him and rolling to the other side of the bed, immediately wrapping herself in the blanket. Strange feelings came over the girl, and she blushed with embarrassment. Maybe she shouldn't stay at Tony's sleepover anymore, she thought, and closed her eyes, slowly drifting into sleep. She woke up a second time to find no one in bed but her, and then she heard the front door open. She got up, adjusted her shirt, pulled up her jeans and left the room. "Hi, Sophia," said Tony with a smile and handed her a bag. "Bought us yogurt and pastries for breakfast." "Hi." Maria took the package and went to the kitchen, thinking all the time about the first time she woke up and the feelings that came over her at that moment. Of course, she loved Tony. There was no question about that. But how did she love him? For the first time, that question began to roll around in her head. It was embarrassing to have such thoughts, but she couldn't get rid of them. "Why are you like this?" Tony asked, obviously noticing that his sister was puzzled about something, because she looked very pensive. "Nothing." Maria smiled immediately and put the pies in the microwave. "What are your plans for today?" he asked her. "Nothing. I'll have breakfast and go home." "And you?" answered Maria. "I want to rest today. I have a lot of work tomorrow. I want to watch a movie, because we didn't watch it yesterday." After these words, Maria blushed and immediately turned away. "You can keep me company. We'll order sushi for lunch, watch movies, and in the evening, nothing. I just need to wash up and get ready for the institute," Maria answered. "Well, it won't take long to wash, and you can do it at my place. And packing for the institute takes a lot of time." "Well, then let's watch another movie, and after sushi I'll go." Maria agreed, unable to find the words to explain her haste. Tony began to suggest movies to watch, and this time they decided to watch sci-fi. Maria snuggled away from her brother, deciding for herself that from now on she would avoid tactile contact with him. Maria took a cab home. Tony, of course, insisted on driving her home, but she convinced her brother to stay and rest before the hard work of the day. All week, Maria found different excuses not to meet Tony, but on Saturday, he came to visit them. After having lunch with everyone, Maria went to her room and sat down at her computer. "May I?" Tony knocked on her shit, and without waiting for an answer, came into the room when the parents together with Julia went for a walk with Buddy. "Why didn't you leave?" Maria asked, and without getting up from the computer chair, turned to face him. "You didn't want to go either." "Maria, you've been avoiding me all week. What have I done wrong?" he asked and sat down on the bed. "You imagined it." Maria made a carefree appearance and smiled. "How about honestly?" Tony kept his gaze on her. "Honestly," she replied. "Shall we go outside too? The weather's nice today," he suggested. "I don't feel like going out today." "What do you feel like doing?" "I wanted to read something. It's for studying." "Am I interrupting?" "I can read later, after you leave." "I wanted to invite you to a concert." The Golden Gramophone is in 2 weeks. I got 2 tickets. Maybe you should go with a girl. It sounded a bit snide, which Maria didn't mean, but it came out that way. I don't have a girlfriend. Maria, what the hell is wrong with you? After last weekend you've been avoiding me. Now you're talking like I'm guilty of something. What's wrong? I'm not leaving here until you answer me," said Tony, completely unaware of what was going on with his sister. "I just don't think I should have any more sleepovers with you," Maria admitted. "What happened to make you feel that way all of a sudden?" "Tony, you and I fell asleep without finishing the movie, and when I woke up, the girl was silent, trying to find the right words." "That?" Tony asked, waiting for her to answer. "We didn't sleep like brother and sister," she said and blushed, remembering that day. "And how did we sleep?" he asked, not taking his eyes off her and smiling slightly. "In a cuddle, well, you know, as who?" answered Maria. "Now I see. So you were confused by the fact that we slept cuddled together." Tony got up from the bed and squatted next to the computer chair where Maria was sitting. "Doesn't that make you uncomfortable?" she asked and looked away. "Maria, we are not brother and sister," he said, continuing to smile. "Tony, I don't know what you mean by that." Maria stood up abruptly from her chair and Tony rose to follow her. Once between him and the computer chair, Maria became nervous and stepped aside abruptly. "What if I told you that I treat you completely differently from my sister?" asked Tony, not realizing how his heart suddenly hammered in Maria's chest after those words. She turned around and leaned back against the computer desk, feeling her cheeks flaming. "Otherwise, what's that like?" she asked quietly. Tony came so close to her that she could hear his heart beating as fast as hers. "I think you can see how," he answered, tilting his head so that his lips almost touched Maria's. Without realizing what she was doing, Maria put her arms around Tony's neck and closed her eyes. She didn't have to wait long. He immediately began kissing her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her against him. The realization that she was kissing Tony suddenly made Maria abruptly break the kiss. The girl pushed away the man she had considered her brother for years and took a step back, trying to regain her breath. "Tony, go away," she said and put her hand out in front of her, letting him know not to come near her. "Maria, let's just talk," he said, in no hurry to leave her room. "About what? We shouldn't have. Oh my God." Maria clutched her head and sighed heavily. Her thoughts were jumbled, and her soul was suddenly gripped by an incomprehensible fear, not to mention the embarrassment she was feeling right now. "Maria, calm down. Sit down and we'll just talk," Tony replied, seeing her state of mind. "We've ruined everything. How can we continue to communicate after something like this?" She looked at him with eyes full of frustration. "Please just listen to me." Tony took her hand, but Maria immediately pulled her hand out of his arm. "What are you so afraid of? I realize I've shocked you, but Maria, I've been looking at you for a long time now, not as a sister, but as a girl I really like, even more than that. To be honest, I've been trying to fight my feelings for you for a long time, but I can't treat you like a sister." "Jesus, Tony, what are you talking about?" Maria covered her face with her palms. "What's wrong with a man liking a woman?" "Well, we grew up together for a while, during which we got to know each other from all sides. You and I spent a lot of time together. Were we not good for each other? Answer yourself. Do you love me?" "Of course I love you, Tony, but how?" Maria was suddenly silent. She didn't understand how she loved him. "A brother? That's not the way you kissed me a few minutes ago." "I don't know what came over me. It was a mistake," Maria answered. "I don't think so," Tony said, and they both heard the front door open and Buddy barking. "We'll talk later. Let's go and have tea. I've brought a delicious cake," he said afterwards. "I don't want anything." Maria went to the window and pulled back the curtain and looked out into the distance. Tony quietly came up behind her and put his arm around her waist. "Have you lost your mind with everything?" Maria bounced away from him like a scolded woman. "Good. We'll get back to this conversation later." Tony sighed and walked out of her room. "Is it Maria going to have tea?" Selena asked when everyone came into the kitchen except Maria. "I'll get her," said Nancy, and went to her sister's room. Finding Maria sitting on the bed and covering her face with her palms, Nancy was very surprised, not understanding what had suddenly happened to her sister. "Maria, what are you doing?" she asked and sat down beside her. "Nothing." She sighed and took her hands away from her face. "What's wrong? Did you have a fight with Tony?" "No, just some problems. It's nothing." Maria forced a smile. "Let's have tea then. Everyone's in the kitchen. Come on." Maria got out of bed. She didn't want her parents to think she had something wrong. At the table, Maria tried not to look at Tony, feeling that he occasionally glanced at her. She finished her tea quickly, and saying that she had a lot of studying to do, retired to her room. When she saw Tony's car outside the institute, Maria stopped, feeling her heart beat faster. "Is the groom meeting her again?" Mickey asked, appearing as if out of thin air. "Of course," answered Maria, and having gathered her courage, went to the car. Tony immediately got out of the car. "Hi," he said with a smile. "Why did you come here?" Maria asked, giving him a stern look. "We didn't agree yesterday." He answered and opened the car door. "Get in. Let's go and sit somewhere." Maria silently got into the car and fastened her seatbelt. What frightened her most was that she wanted to repeat yesterday's kiss and more. Tony stopped the car at the nearest cafe. "Have you come to your senses?" he asked after they'd ordered. "More than okay," Maria replied. "Maria, I want you and me to be together," said Tony. "And how are you going to tell your parents that?" Imagine how they would react to such news. "No, nothing can happen between us, and I'm so sorry that we ruined the beautiful relationship we had with each other," Maria replied, staring at the menu. "Our relationship will be even more beautiful, and our parents will be shocked for a while, but everything will be fine. It's like you keep forgetting that we are not brother and sister or blood relatives. There's no impediment to our relationship." "Tony, I don't know what to say at all." Maria looked at him with a pained look. Fighting herself was very difficult, especially since he really wasn't her brother in essence. "Let's tell our parents today that you and I are getting married," he suggested. The girl's eyes widened, and she paled and opened her mouth to stare at him. "Well, not directly in the forehead, but we'll talk carefully. Explain that we love each other." "Do you mean it now?" Maria regained the power of speech. "Absolutely." Tony put his hand on top of hers. "Maria, I love you." "How long have you loved me?" she asked shyly, starting to blush. "I realized about 3 years ago, but I can't say for how long. Does it matter?" A waiter came to their table and brought their order. "Shall we go to my place after the cafe?" Tony asked as the waiter left. "Did you just invite me for a cupcake?" Maria asked, blushing even more. "No, I just want to be alone with you. I promise I won't hit on you. Unless you want to, nothing will happen," he answered. Amazed at herself, Maria drove to Tony's house, having previously informed her parents that she wouldn't come home tonight. She should have said no, but instead she agreed, unable to cope with her own desires. Tony had kept his word. He didn't even try to kiss Maria when they were in his apartment, but Maria really wanted him to kiss her, and despite the fact that she was afraid of intimacy with a man, because she had never had anyone else, she'd also wanted it, or rather to say she wanted it with him, and to get married too, even thought about the fact that they would have 2 children. "What are you doing?" Tony asked her, seeing how Maria shook her head. "Nothing. Just a little blurry in the eyes," she lied, walking into the bedroom. "Are we going to watch movies again?" she asked. "Whatever you want. We can watch a movie, We can just talk. He said, let's watch Guardians of the Galaxy. Sarah went to the movies last night. She liked the movie. She says it's already on the net. If it is, let's do it. A few minutes later, Maria and Tony were already sitting on the bed at a pioneer's distance from each other. He raised his arm at shoulder level, inviting Maria to settle down next to him. Realizing this without words, she scooted closer and even covered her eyes for a moment when his hand came down on her shoulder. Because of the pile of thoughts in her head, Maria wasn't up for a movie, so she couldn't stand it. Tony, kiss me please. Suddenly she whispered, after about half an hour of watching the movie. The man smiled and gently touched her lips with his lips. And then something happened that Maria didn't expect from herself. Tony didn't insist on more than a kiss, but he was inclined to it by Maria, not saying a word, but rather quickly releasing him from his clothes and caressing his body with her hands. Time to wake up. Maria heard Tony's quiet voice and opened her eyes slightly. 5 more minutes, she whispered back, and a smile appeared on her lips. Sophia, he answered, covering her neck with kisses. At least 3 more minutes. Maria said, not wanting to get out of his embrace. Good, Tony said, pulling her closer to him. Eventually they lay there for 10 minutes, and then they had to get up. How are you? Tony asked Maria. He was of course very careful, afraid of hurting her, and it seemed to him that what had happened between them last night had pleased Maria as much as he had, but he was still worried about the girl. Very well. And you? I'm very inexperienced. Did you have a good time with me? She asked, blushing. Tony immediately put his arms around her and placed a light kiss on her lips. It was great, he replied. We'll tell our parents tonight. No, Maria objected. Let's not tonight. She was still afraid to imagine their reaction to such news. When? Maria, I don't want to hide and meet you secretly. Don't worry, I'll take the fall if there is one. But I know they'll eventually digest it, understand and won't hold it against us. Let's do it next weekend. Why wait so long? I need to get in the mood. Saturday then, and no excuses later. Okay, Maria agreed. Go wash up, and I'll cook breakfast. Tony kissed Maria again and went to the kitchen. Stopping the car near Maria's institute, Tony wished her a good day, kissed her goodbye, and said that today he had a lot of work and they would not be able to meet, but he would call her when he was free. All day Maria smiled, not really getting into her studies. Her thoughts were far away from her right now, and there was nothing she could do about it. You've been in the clouds all day today, said her classmate Ariana, with whom they were on friendly terms. Are you in love? You could say that, said Maria. And who's the lucky guy? Someone from the course or from the institute? No, he's not from the institute. Maria was not going to go into details. Tony, kiss me please. Suddenly she whispered, after about half an hour of watching the movie. The man smiled and gently touched her lips with his lips. And then something happened that Maria didn't expect from herself. Tony didn't insist on more than a kiss, but he was inclined to it by Maria, not saying a word, but rather quickly releasing him from his clothes and caressing his body with her hands. Time to wake up. Maria heard Tony's quiet voice and opened her eyes slightly. 5 more minutes, she whispered back, and a smile appeared on her lips. Sophia, he answered, covering her neck with kisses. At least 3 more minutes. Maria said, not wanting to get out of his embrace. Good, Tony said, pulling her closer to him. Eventually they lay there for 10 minutes, and then they had to get up. How are you? Tony asked Maria. He was of course very careful, afraid of hurting her, and it seemed to him that what had happened between them last night had pleased Maria as much as he had, but he was still worried about the girl. Very well. And you? I'm very inexperienced. Did you have a good time with me? She asked, blushing. Tony immediately put his arms around her and placed a light kiss on her lips. It was great, he replied. We'll tell our parents tonight. No, Maria objected. Let's not tonight. She was still afraid to imagine their reaction to such news. When? Maria, I don't want to hide and meet you secretly. Don't worry, I'll take the fall if there is one. But I know they'll eventually digest it, understand and won't hold it against us. Let's do it next weekend. Why wait so long? I need to get in the mood. Saturday then, and no excuses later. Okay, Maria agreed. Go wash up, and I'll cook breakfast. Tony kissed Maria again and went to the kitchen. Stopping the car near Maria's institute, Tony wished her a good day, kissed her goodbye, and said that today he had a lot of work and they would not be able to meet, but he would call her when he was free. All day Maria smiled, not really getting into her studies. Her thoughts were far away from her right now, and there was nothing she could do about it. You've been in the clouds all day today, said her classmate Ariana, with whom they were on friendly terms. Are you in love? You could say that, said Maria. And who's the lucky guy? Someone from the course or from the institute? No, he's not from the institute. Maria was not going to go into details. Secret? No, he works at Dad's clinic, Maria said, and it was basically true, because Tony worked with his father worked. Dentist? Aha, Maria said. Are you going home? I'm waiting for Ina. We were going to the mall. She's going to her sister's wedding. We're going to pick out a dress for her. Do you want to come with us? Ariana suggested it. I'm going home, Maria answered. See you tomorrow then. See you tomorrow. As Maria left, Mickey approached Ariana. Why are you so sour today? She asked him. Nothing. Do you happen to know if Maria is serious about this on the audit? He asked. What audit? Ariana didn't understand. Well, on the grey Audi that often picks her up. Ariana laughed. So it's her brother who picks her up. But she has a boyfriend too. So Mickey, forget it, and switched to another subject. Ariana replied. Brother? Asked the man with his eyes bulging. Yeah. Why are you so surprised? No reason. Mickey answered and walked away. He had seen Maria kissing this brother in the morning. In the evening, Tony didn't call, but came to their house with his parents. Maria was terribly afraid that Tony did not stay long in Maria's room. They talked a little, and then he went to sleep in the room where he once lived. Mickey arrived early on purpose and waited for Maria. When he saw the grey Audi, he hid behind one of the pillars near the entrance to the institute and watched. From this spot, he could see Maria kissing her brother. Holy shit, he was shocked by what he saw. He had never seen such a perversion before. Mickey took out his phone and took a few pictures. He didn't wait for Maria to get out of the car and went to the institute. Throughout the whole class, Maria saw Mickey staring at her with a very strange look. When they ran into each other in the cafeteria, she couldn't stand it and asked, May I ask why you stare at me all the time? Maria asked him. I'll tell you after class. He answered, I'm not really interested in the reason. Just stop looking at me like that, said Maria, and went to Ariana, who was already paying for her lunch. Mickey waited for Maria on the street after class, happy that the grey Audi was not near the institute. Shall we walk to the subway? He asked when the girl went outside. No. Mickey, I've told you 1,000,000 times I'm not going out with you. Stop following me already, Maria said irritably. I didn't know you were a pervert, Maria Lannister. He grinned nastily, then pulled his phone out of his jacket pocket and showed Maria the pictures of her making out with Tony in the car. I'm really curious. Do your parents know what their kids are doing? At the institute too. No one knows yet, but that's just for now, he said in such a tone, as if there was a battle between them in which she lost. Maria was frightened at first, and then suddenly began to laugh. Could she have thought that this underdog was spying on her? This is spy stuff. Mickey, are you playing spy? Maria asked through her laughter. No. I accidentally found out that you're with your own brother. Pervert. He replied, making a squeamish grimace. Without knowing anything, you shouldn't draw conclusions. He's not my brother. Maria stopped laughing and looked at her interlocutor like an idiot. Your brother comes for you or the grey auditory. He didn't understand. Ariana was obviously telling the truth. There was no doubt about it. No, we have different parents, so I'm not a pervert, but you're a total asshole. Not wanting to continue this conversation, Maria hurried away. When Tony called her in the evening, she told him about the situation and they laughed together. I hope that Mickey doesn't go running all over the institute and spreading gossip, he said. What's there to gossip about? I told him that you and I are not related, answered Maria. He can present it differently, but there is no point in it. Maria, come to me tomorrow after the institute. I'll give my father the spare keys and you take it from him. I think he'll understand right away if you give me the keys. Let's bet on Friday I'll come to you, and on Saturday we'll go home together and talk to your parents. Maria suggested. It's a long way to Friday. Maria, I want to see you more than once a week. I want you to move in with me, Tony confessed. I miss you too, Tony, but I don't want it to be a mess. We should get together and have a proper talk. We'll do that on Saturday, and then we'll go to your place on Friday. Okay. He sighed heavily. Kisses and good night's sleep. You too, Maria replied with a smile. Ariana immediately rushed to Maria as soon as she arrived at the institute. Maria, this Mickey told me today that you are sleeping with your brother and lying that he is not your brother. She said quietly so no one would hear them. What a degenerate. Maria clenched her fists. Ariana, Tony really isn't my brother, she admitted. I don't understand anything. You said yourself that he's your older brother. Ariana looked pointedly at Maria. I did. His father married my mom when I was 5 and Tony was 10. Since then, we grew up together. Then my mom gave birth to Nancy. We both call our parents mom-dad, but Tony and I aren't related, Maria explained. Wow, so you were living together and suddenly you had an affair? No, it just started, and Tony hasn't lived with us for a long time. Ariana, we were always good together. We just didn't realize we had different feelings for each other right away. How did your parents feel about it? Asked Ariana, flapping her eyes. We haven't told them yet. We're going on Saturday. There is nothing wrong with the fact that we love each other and want to be together. I'm nervous about it, but I think it'll be fine. Without shock, of course, will not do. But Mom and Dad we have normal will understand, I think. I don't want any rumors to spread around the institute. I won't tell anyone. And unless your brother and sister, there's nothing wrong with your affair. There's nothing to gossip about, Ariana replied. Exactly. Maria agreed with her, and they went to their first class. Friday. Tony was waiting for Maria at the very door of the institute, holding a beautiful bouquet of flowers. Ariana smiled widely when she saw him and then looked at Maria, whose face lit up with a happy smile when she saw Tony, and without any shyness threw herself on his neck and kissed him on the lips. Noticing a disgruntled Mickey, Ariana immediately went over to him. Stop staring at them, she said, and shut your mouth or your jaw will fall off. You said he was her brother. Mickey threw an angry look at his classmate. I was wrong. It's just that their parents are married. There's no blood relation between Maria and Tony, so they're not perverts. Okay, Mickey muttered, glanced at the kissing couple, and then walked away. Maria and Tony hugged and walked to his car. So how are you doing at the institute? That Mickey didn't spread any lewd rumors? Tony asked, starting the car. I told Ariana, but I told her everything as it was. It's just that before I told her you were my brother without going into details. Didn't your parents ask where you were sleeping tonight? They did. I told them I was going to the club with Sarah, Carlo and you, and since you live much closer to the club, I'd be staying at your place tonight. They react calmly and don't even seem to suspect anything. Maria smiled. Sarah is starting to have an affair with Carlo. Oh yeah, and you kept saying she liked me, said Tony. I know. It's a good thing she switched. Jealous of me? Tony smiled slyly. Nope, I knew you were indifferent to her, Maria replied. As soon as they were in Tony's apartment, he immediately hugged Maria and kissed her, taking her into the room. I missed you terribly, so I won't let you sleep tonight, he whispered, deftly releasing her from her clothes. I don't mind that at all, Maria replied, unbuttoning his jeans. She even felt a little ashamed of her lecherous behavior, but her desires overcame her shame. She felt so good right now, and she didn't want to leave Tony even for a minute. She didn't care about gossip if it got around the institute. She wasn't afraid to confess everything to her parents. She wanted to be with him, not brotherly love, and what was happening between them now was beautiful and filled her soul with boundless happiness. After stopping first at a cafe to have breakfast, Maria and Tony went to her parents to finally tell them about their relationship. Are you afraid? Tony asked Maria before they entered the apartment. Not as much as before, she said, turning the key in the lock. Selena was the first to greet them. How was the dance? She asked, smiling at the children. It was fine, Tony answered, helping Marie take off her jacket. Wash your hands, come into the kitchen, I made pancakes. We just had breakfast at the cafe, so we'll have pancakes later. Tony answered, Where's Dad? In the office with the documents, Selena said, and Nancy went out with her friends. She'll be back by lunchtime. Mom, can you get Dad for me, please? We need to talk, said Tony. What's wrong? She asked, and the smile disappeared from her face. Nothing bad, he said. Everyone gathered in the kitchen, and Tony was the first to speak. Mom, Dad, don't be nervous and don't react very violently, he said, noticing how Maria turned pale. The thing is that Maria and I, well, in short, we are not really brother and sister, and we have a slightly different relationship. We're serious and we want to be together. Selena turned white as a sheet, and Alexander frowned and stared at his son in amazement. I realize you're in shock, but there's nothing wrong with me and Maria loving each other, Tony continued. Yes, but, Selena mumbled, not knowing what to say. What's the but, she thought, not finishing her sentence. Well, Alexander said and put his hands around his head. Mom, Dad, but Tony and I are not related to each other. We can be together, and there is nothing wrong with it. Maria rambled on. I see now what you were doing when you stayed at his place. Selena said this with a note of reproach in her voice and looked at her daughter with a judgmental look. Not at all, said Tony in his own defense. I wonder how you realize that. Alexander raised his tone slightly. The man was clearly angry. They started tumbling around in bed and hit you. Daddy, Maria gasped and blushed. I'm just shocked. Alexander shook his head. Dad, we want to get married. We want to live together. What's that got to do with tumbling around in bed? Tony said. So you're going to start a family? Alexander sighed heavily. Is that a bad thing? You're looking at me as if Maria and I were incestuous. I understand that all this is unexpected for you and Mom, but we don't want to hide our relationship and feelings from you, Tony replied. We need to all calm down, said Selena, and took a breath, and then an exhale, trying to come to her senses after such news. That's for sure. Alexander agreed with his wife. We'll have an interesting family. Although, you're really not brother and sister, so. Alexander waved his hand and got up from the table. Where are you going? Selena asked him. To get a whiskey. Do you want some? No, but I need a drink. Grab me some wine, Selena said. Mom, it's no big deal. Maria put her hand over her mother's. It's all very sudden. We didn't realize it was like this between you two. We couldn't even imagine it. Selena sighed. Are you against us getting married? Maria asked, looking sadly at her mother. You need to get over all this. Of course, you're not brother and sister, and you can have a relationship. It's just that we all lived as a family, and to me, you are both my children. Selena suddenly cried, and Tony immediately got up from his seat and hugged her. Mom, what are you doing? He asked and smiled slightly. Alexander returned to the kitchen with 2 bottles and poured whiskey for himself and wine for his wife. Selena, drink a little and calm down, he said, and the woman realized her head and looked at Tony. How are we going to tell Nancy all this? She asked. She knows that Maria and I are not related to each other. We'll explain everything. Don't worry, please. Oh. Selena took a glass of wine and drank it in one gulp. Looking at his wife, Alexander drank half a glass of whiskey, took a bite of lemon, wrinkled his nose, and looked at the children. When are we going to get married? He asked. We haven't applied yet, but of course we want to in the summer, Tony answered. Will you be staying at your place? Sure, I'd like Maria to move in with me now. Well, the man poured himself another whiskey and drank it all down again. I hope it's serious and there's no divorce in your future, he said. It can't be more serious. I've loved Maria for a long time and I'm sure I always will, answered Tony. I'm sure that's a good thing. Selena, what do you think? He looked at his wife. What can I say? If they love each other, let them get married. The woman looked at the children and smiled slightly, and Tony hugged Maria without any shyness. So Nancy returned from her walk, and it was explained to her that Maria and Tony would soon become husband and wife. The girl, of course, was also shocked by such news, but she took it less emotionally than her parents. It wasn't that scary, said Tony with a smile as he and Maria returned to his house, taking most of Maria's things. I was still terribly nervous though, she admitted. I'd noticed. But it's still good. He hugged the girl and looked into her eyes. Maria, I love you so much, and I'm very happy that we don't have to hide anything, as if we were criminals with you, he said. It made me feel so much better that we confessed everything. Mom and Dad had scared me at first, but I had faith that they would understand and wouldn't be against us. And I didn't doubt it, he answered. I'm still surprised that I didn't realize how much I loved you before, and not like my brother. Maria said with a smile. I didn't realize that I loved you differently either. The most important thing is that we finally realized it, and now we are together. Shall we go through your things? Let's go. They hugged and went to their room. Maria and Tony married in the summer, and 3 years later they had a son. By then Maria had just finished her studies and had already done some work in a veterinary clinic. All her dreams came true, albeit with some nuances, because she no longer has an older brother. But she does not regret it at all. Where am I going? Why? Thought Julia, mentally merging with the clatter of the wheels. The train was going nowhere, and that suited the woman just fine. She had recently turned 30. Time to summarize the intermediate results of her life, and they were not happy from the word at all. She had recently divorced her husband, and since then the relationship with the stronger sex did not add up. She never got her own place, and a week ago she quit her job, even though her career was on the upswing, simply because she was tired and felt empty inside. And about housing, is it possible to earn money for it, especially in Moscow? An old woman's voice pulled her out of her thoughts. A traveling companion, the smiling grandmother asked, What, you decided to go to the sea too? Yes, Julia nodded. Sun, beach, seafood. Maybe you'll find a man too, the woman said and winked. Her words made Julia irritated for some reason. Could she really see that she was lonely? And do people go to the sea just to have a fling with someone? No, she needed a reboot. Something more than just a fling. She needed to figure out how to move on. Why do I need a man? Julia said. They're just trouble. I'm fine on my own. or with my girlfriends. Are you one of those? The grandmother asked and winked again. Now the young woman began to laugh. The harmless old woman was just joking, that's all. In principle, quite funny. Probably on her way to some sanitarium. Or one of the last reunions of her life. Or maybe she bought a trip with her last time and hopes to have a good time. Oh, Grandma, you don't know what the prices are like in Orlando. Orlando. Julia exhaled. It's like running away from myself. My soul calls me to the Cape Desert, or to the resorts of Rimini, where the sun is endless, where people smile and you feel like the most important person in the world. I'd like to go surfing on the Spanish coast, braid my own pigtails. Grandmother was silent, thinking over her companion's words. For a few minutes, she savored all these dreams of her companion. The sea somewhere in Western Europe, another culture, smiling people. You need a man, she said. You're on the plus side in any situation. Either he'll be good, and you won't have time for bad thoughts, or bad, and then you'll know exactly who's to blame. And she laughed, satisfied with her joke. This time the old woman's words were annoying. The train had left Washington only an hour ago. They were to spend the whole 24 hours in the same compartment. If she kept spouting this old wisdom, she might well lose her mind. But Julia decided not to give her aggression a chance. One must be patient and lenient. What is your name? Julia asked. Landa, answered her grandmother. Parents then decided to stand out. And the full name? Probably Linda, I have no idea. In the 90s, I was called Samara, then Granta. And recently, can you believe it? They called me Mongoose. Oh, Largus. But I've gotten used to it over the years. Now it was her traveling companion's turn to laugh. But then she suddenly became serious. Her head was flooded with heavy, bad memories. For that was the name of a woman who... I'm Julia, said the young woman. Pleased to meet you. You see how it happens. With you in the compartment could be some grandfather with whom you would then drink wine on the beach. But you got a woman. I don't know if I'm young or not. Young, my grandmother waved her hand. What are you? About 35 years old. You could say I've just started to live. The impudence of the traveling companion was beginning to strain. Think about it, 35. Actually, Julia took care of herself. She went to the beautician, 2 evenings a week spent in the gym, and another in the pool. She regularly updated her hair to make her blonde hair look almost natural. I just turned 30, Julia replied, and you must be approaching 90. The grandmother laughed again. The young woman looked at her closely and tried to understand what surprised her so much about her traveling companion. At first glance, nothing unusual. Short haircut, neat wrinkles, white teeth. Summer clothes. You can't go to Orlando in a headscarf and boots. But still, there's something odd. The old lady looked happy. The barb didn't faze the grandmother. She didn't complain, but radiated immense optimism. Perhaps that's what annoyed Julia. Oh, granddaughter, you need to go to the sea urgently, said the old woman. I'm sorry, but you have accumulated a lot of evil energy. It's all right. The water will take it all away. I'm sorry, Julia said. I don't know what came over me. Honestly, you don't look 90. I'm 70, by the way, Grandma said. All my hair, and my teeth, and my joints. Do you want me to tell you the secret? Go ahead, the companion waved her hand. You need a man, Landa said, flexing her fingers. A bigger man. Give birth by him, that's 2. And better not one selfish son, but 2. Or 3. A good job is 3. One that not only takes energy, but gives it. Landa turned away and looked out the window. How many times had she heard that kind of advice over the years? You'd think men would be happy. Julia hadn't had many, but each one had brought her nothing but disappointment. A tear ran down her cheek. No, the psychologist told her that she should never feel sorry for herself. You have to stay strong. Suddenly, there were shrieks. There were children running through the corridors, and the sound of them playing irritated Julia. "Can't they keep it down?" the young woman almost shouted. "Who is it that drags such small children to the sea?" Judging by the screaming, they are not even 5 years old, and also sends them to walk along the corridors of the train alone. That's dangerous, by the way. There were many different cases. The kids were still yammering somewhere very close by, literally under the door. You could not only hear their voices, but also make out individual words. It seemed they were going to play hide and seek. Suddenly, the compartment door slid aside, and a boy with wheat-colored hair appeared behind it. He looked at the female passengers and began to curl his fingers. "One on," he said, pointing to his grandmother, and looked at the young woman. "Two aunts. Two old aunts. Where are your husbands? Where are the grandchildren?" "Shoo," Julia threw down. "Run back to your mom before she punishes you." "I won't go," the boy replied stubbornly. "I'm a big boy. I'll be 5 soon. I'll walk wherever I want." "Come on, little boy," said Landa playfully. "Go back to your parents, or else I'll take you and keep you. I liked you at once. Such a juicy, beautiful child. You will cook for me, clean, do the laundry." The boy was frightened. He took a step back, closed the door to the compartment, and ran. They heard the stomping of his little feet. He must have taken Landa's joking threat quite seriously. The young woman wiped the sweat from her forehead. The good mood that had appeared at the beginning of the trip was gone. Her compartment mate across the hall was laughing. She really liked her joke, and after all, the baby may well have a psychological trauma. "You don't like children?" the old woman asked, wiping away her tears of joy. "Well, not exactly," Julia answered evasively. "What, no children of your own?" Grandmother smiled slyly. "Everything has to be on time. I've been a midwife for 40 years. 40. How many babies I've delivered, I can't count." Julia was once again overcome by unpleasant memories. How many years has it been? 10, no less. And if you add 9 months, yes, definitely, she should have taken an airplane to the sea, or rent a car, get away from the world. And now I have to put up with this young grandmother. "I used to really want children," Julia said seriously. "I really did. But, there was one unpleasant incident. I wouldn't want to tell the first person I met about it." "Oh, granddaughter," said Landa, suddenly serious. "I've seen more than I can tell you in 40 years. Dramas, I tell you, real dramas. When I see programs about the maternity ward, I turn it off. It's a scary place if you think about it. In the picture, everyone's smiling, everyone's happy, but what's behind it? There's tears, there's pain, and despair." "I believe so," replied her traveling companion. The summer mood began to return to her. Soon she will come to the sea. She will put on flip-flops and a light dress. The warm wind would caress her hair. "It's just, the ex-midwife said, it's not the baby's fault. They say that children are responsible for the sins of their parents, grandparents, and all that nonsense. They're not responsible for anything. They need our love, our warmth." Even those who have only been born for a couple of days, they were silent. 30 years and 70 is a real abyss. What could they have in common to talk about? Julia hated hospitals and everything that went with them, especially maternity hospitals. Mickey had never persuaded her to try for a baby. She kept putting it off until he was gone for good. Good riddance. It's just that Mickey didn't know something about her, something very important. But what would that information have given him? I suppose if he'd known, he'd have left even sooner. Or he wouldn't have married her. I don't think so. He was so blinded by love. He couldn't sleep until he had her in his arms. He was a good man. He worked, hung a shelf, complimented her. Why couldn't she ever really love him? "What hospital did you work at?" Julia asked, more out of politeness than curiosity. "Me?" Grandma asked, as if there was a third person in the compartment. Do you really want to know in which institution I spent the best years of my life? Yes, the young woman nodded. Very much so. But what the old woman answered made Julia feel shocked and plunged back into the darkest memories of her 30 years of life. The young woman fell into a deep abyss, and she saw herself becoming a bird. She saw herself flying over the forest, over the sea, with clouds passing beneath her every now and then. And in this state it was so light, so airy, that I wanted to stay in the sky forever, to feel the wind caressing his feathers, the hot currents of air rising. From up here, from the heights, the whole world was as plain and simple as the palm of her hand. But as she made flaps with her imaginary wings, memory and consciousness came back to her. She was already realizing that it was all just a dream. She was not a bird, but a young woman who had achieved everything on her own. Or not, but by herself. Julia opened her eyes. A nurse was standing over her, ineffectually trying to open the ampoule of ammonia. The tip would not break off. "Put it away, you inept," Grandma shouted. "God, if I had known, I would not have run after you through the whole train. I had just graduated from honey," the nurse justified, ridiculously stretching vowels. "You know, trains are usually poisoned to the max. This one fainted. I don't know how to do that yet. What are you, a doctor?" "If only," Landa waved her hand. "I'm a midwife, for God's sake. Retired a long time ago. What do they teach at school nowadays? It's a shame not to know which side to open the ampoule." "I don't know," the nurse blushed. "I didn't graduate from a school, but from a college." "Arf," cursed the elderly midwife. "Give me the tonometer." "Damn it, do you even know how to use it?" "It's all right," Julia said. "It's the sun on my head, I think. I'll just sit here for a while and it'll go away. I just need some water." Julia sat down in her seat. Did she faint? No wonder. She was on her way to the sea and suddenly stopped in the past, one of the darkest parts of it. It's no wonder your head hit the stopcock. The mind is just trying to push out such a horrible memory that is almost impossible to come to terms with. "Sit, be quiet," Landa smiled. "You've come to your senses, and all right, that's good. Here, stretch out your arm. Let's take your blood pressure." In the nurse's bag was an old tonometer, where everything had to be done manually and pressure and pulse count. But when the elderly midwife started work, there was no other technology. No fancy computers, no CT scanners. Ultrasound was a bit of a fantasy. It all appeared gradually, at such a pace that you could get used to the wonders. "Oh, young green," said Landa. "What, were you on a diet before the sea? Your blood pressure's low. I'd call it hunger fainting, to be honest." "Well, not really," the young woman answered evasively. "It's just that I haven't slept in 2 days. I had projects to finish." "Schmeckter projects," the grandmother cursed. "You have to live for yourself, not for your uncle, you know?" The nurse was glad no one needed to be hospitalized. She wouldn't have to run to the boss and order a medical team and issue a certificate. She hated doing those things. She'd sooner be off work, and she could look for some non-dusty office work. "To raise the pressure, you need," said Landa, shamelessly rummaging through the nurse's suitcase. "What is this? Look, it's all expired." "Well, what did you give?" mumbled the girl. She wanted to stay in the compartment and learn something else from her grandmother. But there will be more important things to do. "You have to order everything yourself," Lando instructed her, "and make a list. And if they don't let you complain, write a letter." "I think I'd better go," said the nurse, "since you're feeling better." The door closed behind her, and the elderly midwife looked at her companion carefully. What could have upset this beautiful woman so much? It was certainly not the sleepless night. She could tell the difference between fainting and fatigue. Landa felt like a detective who had a mystery to solve. "Why are you so upset?" the old woman asked with a sly smile. "Have you been to my place, or your friend?" "I've been there myself," Julia exhaled. "My God, It's such a hell, such an abyss. The more she looked at the old woman's features, the more she saw the midwife in them. Yes, it was definitely her. Had it not been for the rare name, the woman would not have remembered this person. But now it was as if the memories were begging to come out, as if they wanted someone to tell them. Well, tell it, Grandma said. You have to go through it all and then let it go. I'd always do that, and you'll have harmony in your soul right away. If only everything was so easy, sighed the young woman. In fact, to talk about this topic is unpleasant for me. After all, The old woman took a closer look. Something in the features of her companion's face was familiar to her. It was as if she knew her when she was very young, a kind of unbaked bread. Now she was looking at a real bun, delicious and beautiful. There must be a lot of people out there who would love to try it, and when Julia began to tell her why she had fainted, the old woman's memory also conjured up images. Yes, it was definitely her. Now she would dive into her memories, and she would definitely reconstruct the whole picture. For a while, the young woman gathered her thoughts. She weighed whether to share the darkest memories of her life with a random person. What was her connection to this chipper old woman? It was unlikely they would see each other again. But that was the beauty of it. For the first time in her life, she could discuss a tragedy that had happened to her years ago with someone. I was in the chapel. Julia began her story. I was there for 3 weeks, maybe more. I can't remember exactly. Hem, said the old woman and started snapping her fingers. That's right, I remember you. Difficult pregnancy, early labor, a boy. Tears ran down Julia's cheeks. That's right, just a boy. She doesn't know his weight or height, not even the color of his eyes. She hasn't baptized him or even pressed him to her own breast. Just a boy, that's all. The pregnancy was very difficult, Julia said, as if making excuses. I was all alone, and I was in a foreign city. Yeah, Washington, D.C. was a stranger to me then. Oh, granddaughter, said her grandmother, and took her hand. I know how you feel. But he was born normal, right? No, Julia shook her head. It was a long labor, very difficult, and it ended sadly. Aha, nodded the former midwife. It was Elizabeth who delivered the baby, for fuck's sake. God's doctor, I hated working the same shift with her. I don't know, is there something wrong with my memory? I seem to remember that everything ended well, didn't it? I fell asleep right there in the hospital. I wouldn't have made it home. Do you remember? The heavy memories made the young woman dizzy again. How many hours had she been on the delivery table? And that doctor kept refusing to do a C-section. Nothing, she said. You're so healthy. You'll be fine on your own. And the boy was quite big. It was Julia's first labor, and she trusted the doctor. She was cynical, of course. She said you can manage on your own. You're not the first, you're not the last. And why do women have to go through such ordeals? The old woman's face became even more familiar to her now. That's right. She was the one who held her hand the whole time, taught her how to breathe, and spent all those long, grueling hours with her. Come on, you can do it, she shouted at her. But on that fateful day, Landa was not yet a full-fledged old woman. She looked quite dignified then and moved so quickly on her feet. Now she's all gaunt and hunched over. You know, it's hard for me to remember all this, Julia said after a long silence. It's such a tragedy. I understand, the old woman nodded. I don't want to talk about work either, I'm sorry. It's all my fault. I started asking you questions, giving you advice. I started thinking up a man for you, and I'm ashamed of myself. I've been told many times, unsolicited advice is like castor oil. Easy to give, disgusting to take. It's all right, the young woman replied. You wanted what was best. It's just that, yes, it was a difficult moment. The boy was very bad. And so I. What do you mean bad? The old woman said thoughtfully. My memory must be failing me. Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. They're begging for my tea. So, wait, Julia interrupted her. What do you remember? You didn't want to talk about it. Landa waved her hand. You're going to feel bad again. I'm sorry, I won't run after a nurse a second time. You saw it yourself. She's a misunderstanding. I had 1 month, yeah. Wait a minute. The young woman waved her hands. What do you remember? Tell me. It's very important for me to know how it all ended. Oh, granddaughter, I don't want to brag, but my memory is like your computer, smiled the grandmother slyly. I remember everything. Well, if I go to the store, so about kefir and butter will certainly forget. But I remember my children, every single one of them, and the first cry too. People are all alike, but so different, like snowflakes on glass. Tell me about mine, Julia asked, wiping away her tears. How did it end? Oh, girl, I'm going on vacation, sighed Landa. There were different rumors in our hospital. They say that after the birth, Elizabeth came to you herself, right? And I did not want to believe those rumors. I thought it was just a rumor. Tell me about it. My traveling companion asked me once again. Tell me, I can't stand it. The young woman's heart became uneasy. How many times she wanted to push these memories out of her head. But apparently, such things are not forgotten. The terrible pain she had experienced after giving birth was nothing compared to what happened afterward, and even the betrayal of men could be endured. Grandma spoke, reluctantly, as if doing her a favor. The former midwife's story made Julia feel sick, but she managed it. In her head, once again, she felt the urge to act. But dare she do anything in a situation like this? Or should she accept it and let it go? Alas, the old woman's words brought neither oblivion nor comfort. They only raised new unanswered questions. Landa originally trained as a teacher and even managed to work in a school. American language and literature, what could be more boring? But after a couple of years, she realized it wasn't her thing. She always wanted to be a doctor. She would not have been able to cope with another few years at university and internship, so she decided to finish school. By the age of 28, she had become a midwife, and in that capacity, she spent decades in the hospital. Of course, she met her clients in unexpected places. At church, at the store, at the swimming pool. Women often recognized her and gave her their smiles, chocolates, flowers. But this trip to Orlando and her traveling companion was too much. Landa no longer smiled as radiantly as she had at the beginning of the trip. In fact, she regretted going to Orlando in the first place. And behind her contrived cheerfulness, she was hiding a secret also terrible, but in its own way. 3 days ago, the doctor told her she had a few months to live. So her trip was her last. She honestly tried to persuade her friends to accompany her. Oh no, you don't, answered Selena, the closest of them all. The cucumbers are coming up soon. I've got pickles to make. And my joints, God forgive me, are failing. I won't get on your train. I'm dying, Selena. Landa told her. Come with me, we'll have the last time. We all die, said her friend thoughtfully, but they had been together since high school. Then Landa decided to invite Sophia with her. She does not have a cottage, which means that she does not suffer from hothouse addiction. But the woman they've been friends with since medical school was about to knock on heaven's door. I'm sick. Sophia answered, I can't get out of bed for 5 days. So let me come and help you. Landa offered. Despite the fatal diagnosis, she felt well and alert. There are enough helpers, said her friend. You'd better go to the sea. I'll meet you there in heaven. Then Landa called Maria, Veronica, Lucy, Naomi, and other friends, many of whom she had met over the course of her long life. Some of them said bluntly that they had neither money nor desire to go to the sea. Some were simply afraid to go so far away without friends and relatives. The youngest of her companions was 65 years old. All of them turned out to be deep old women, with diseases, children, drunken husbands, and other problems. And now a chance conversation with a woman who had lost her child. Landa has seen dozens of such tragedies. You never get used to a mother's tears. But this beautiful woman is different. God didn't take her son from her, she gave him away. And now she wants the old midwife to get the details of that disgusting story out of her memory. I remember you, don't I? Said Landa. I remember you giving birth to your son, and how Elizabeth refused to deliver you by cesarean. I confess I wanted to take a scalpel myself, so tired of your cries. You did it yourself. My traveling companion was surprised. Her eyebrows went up. I'm just kidding, the woman shrugged. Surgeons do cesarean sections, but it's still a doctor's decision, not some midwife. Who's going to listen to me, pray tell? Grandma was quiet. She remembered her very well. How many hours they spent in the delivery room. It was hard for everyone, not only for the young girl who had just moved to Washington, but her especially. In the week she spent in the maternity ward, not a single message, not a single note. No one had visited her, and attention was very important to a woman at such a critical time. Landa remembered 2020 and crossed herself. How her ward had become like a fortress under siege. In the early 10th, it was a different story. Both friends and relatives were allowed to visit women in labor. They gathered in the halls, on benches. That's what I'm talking about, Landa nodded. You know, I raised 3 of them, put them on their feet. Children are a heavy burden, and a mother's share is hard. Then they grow up and don't even want to visit. I'm not even talking about bringing grandchildren. On the one hand, it's happiness, but on the other hand, it's hard. She wanted to say something else about happiness, purpose, goals, and lost the thread of the conversation. She was just tired, digging into her own memory, judging. After all, she'd originally gone to Orlando for a vacation, to remember her youth and shake off the old days. Oh yeah, one last trip. To see the sea before I died, to warm my old bones. It'll be easier to answer to God later. He was a healthy man, Landa said to end the conversation. I understand that it was hard for you alone in a strange city. But granddaughter, all this is a thing of the past. Let God judge us. You just don't know what happened next, Julia said. There were no more tears in her eyes. After I gave birth, and how badly I was deceived. What happened next? Landa asked. She was beginning to lose her patience. What don't I know, granddaughter? I've got a good memory. I even remember that they paid for a room for you, a private room. Probably your fiancé or your parents. I can understand that, believe me. It's just that I would never approve of something like that. It wasn't exactly like that. In the night, someone came to see me, the young woman sighed. Who did? Landa wondered. The doctor on duty, or the baby's father? She could hardly refrain from saying everything she thought about such mothers, that they give birth for no good reason. And then she, Landa, looks at the abandoned baby and cries. It wasn't quite like that. She was ready to hear such an answer, but the truth as told by the stranger was hard and shocking. So much so that it was utterly impossible to believe in the reality of the story. How much time had passed since those events? How much water had passed? At that time, at the beginning of July, Julia should have been 20 years old, but the boy had been born a couple of weeks early. She was scheduled to go into labor on the 5th of July, just in time for her 20th birthday. That would have been a gift, but it turned out that planning such events is a thankless task. Already at the end of May, she went into the hospital with a risk of premature labor. Why did you come as on a tour? Then the nurse was indignant, looking at the modest luggage of the new patient. Where is your mug? And your spoon? And your robe? What about your discharge clothes? Julia only sighed. Max had promised to help her, but had almost disappeared from the radar at the very end of spring. She herself had worked at the cafe until the last day, running around in heels and carrying heavy trays, until the day she felt her stomach pulling. She came to the clinic and went straight to the hospital. or rather, to the maternity hospital. Until that day, the girl did not think much about giving birth in a special hospital. "Everything will be," answered Julia to the claims of the nurse. "Well, gradually. I will order something. Relatives will bring something." "All right," the woman took pity. "A toothbrush and soap is good enough. We'll give you a towel, and a mug and a spoon. But the things for the discharge should be like our Father's Prayer. And diapers. You know how diapers sell out. And baby food for supplemental feeding. But that's for later. We get money from the budget, by the way. We don't have any extra." Julia never got used to the contrasts of Washington: expensive cars, huge skyscrapers, luxury and glamour, and next to a maternity ward with no diapers or extra towels. She looked at the list of things her future baby would need, and her mood got even worse. Oh my God, so many things. She still knew what a beanie and booties were, but scrunchies. She had to look online to find out what such an outlandish item was. Good thing she didn't need a jumpsuit in the middle of summer. Then she climbed into the online store and came to a slight horror from the prices of envelopes. Do they hold wads of money in them all at once? "Max," Julia whispered into the phone, "please come over. There's so much to buy. I can't do it without you." "Yes, of course," answered the father-to-be. "Today probably won't work, but tomorrow." The trouble was, he didn't say no to all her suggestions. If he had said right away that he wouldn't take on such a heavy burden, she might not have left the baby under her heart. For the first few weeks of her pregnancy, Max just carried her in his arms and came to her every day and bought groceries and gave her money for tests. But as her belly grew, his fervor faded. "Tomorrow we'll buy rings," he promised, "and we'll apply to the registry office. I've already found out everything. Non-residents can also register their marriage." "That would be good," Julia answered him, "because a child should have a family, a father and a mother. And the mother-to-be needed expensive pills, because all medicines are expensive. Of course, she could use moral support in the person of her future husband. Max had many chances and just as many excuses. At one time he was ill, and he was supposedly in his dormitory because, "I don't want to get you sick," he'd say into the phone. "You are our unborn child." But in the background, the girl could clearly hear men's voices and the sounds of construction, still working. However, she wanted to believe that Max was not a Shabbat, but really cared about her health. The first 2 weeks, spent in the maternity hospital, the failed fiancé worked from the last strength. "So much work," he said. "A lot of work. But you will go out. I will buy a stroller and a crib. We will have everything." "Max, I'm going into labor." Julia screamed. "I need things for the discharge. If you're not coming, just say so." "You don't have to yell at me," the man said calmly. "I said I'll do it, so I'll do it. Okay, kisses." At some point, he just stopped answering the phone. It was a hard truth to accept. Max wasn't what she'd imagined, and his love was just words multiplied by 0. She also didn't know that labor was sudden and unexpected. She was just taken to a special room and onward. In the books Julia had read, it was different. It was a moment the writers had avoided altogether. Maybe it was because they were men. She remembered the birth vaguely, the midwife's face, the doctor's cynical smile, the blood. Then she was brought to the ward, exhausted and exhausted. They didn't even put the baby on her breast. Then came a forgetfulness, so pleasant, so light, as if she were no longer on this earth. That night Julia was very thirsty. She whispered faintly for help to her neighbors in the ward, but no one answered, and it seemed to her that she was lying there all alone. But then, at some point, the door opened. A light from the corridor illuminated the room. Julia was indeed alone. "Water," she whispered. "Here, drink." The guest handed her an open bottle. The girl drank it in a few gulps. The girl did not even immediately realize that the doctor had come. There was no strength. Probably she should have examined the young mom, offered some medication, painkillers. But the doctor just stood there silent. It was strange and unusual. "Your boy is bad," Elizabeth told her after a long pause. "Bad," Julia repeated. "Until the morning, most likely, will not reach the morning," continued to chop the truth uterus doctor. "But you are young. You can still give birth, and more than one. Here's the thing. If the boy survives, it will be very difficult. You'll be working on medication for the rest of your life. You can forget about your personal life right away. You can't get a good job or meet a man. Do you know how mothers of disabled people live? Poor, but not for long." Julia turned away. To hear such words was not just painful, but horrible. Her baby, whom she gave birth to in terrible agony, is not alive. And even if he did, she would have to lay her fate on the altar of fighting for her son. It seemed a very hard and unfair prospect. What to do? The new mother asked in a weak voice. After listening to her rambling story, Landa plunged into thought. What people can think of to justify the mistakes of the past. This one, for instance, seems to think Elizabeth forced her to give up her baby. Why would she do that? She had a son of her own. Work said he was a bad boy. Does she want another one? However, the elderly midwife saw at least a grain of truth in the story. After all, Elizabeth was indeed a very strange doctor, and some of her actions and decisions looked suspicious. However, in a maternity hospital with no time to rest, it was not easy to notice such things. Once she demanded that she redo her paperwork. Allegedly, one child had already been born undead, but Landa, who had delivered the baby, had heard the cries, felt the little heart beating. She refused to make any changes to the paperwork. Elizabeth did it herself and got away with it. How could I not believe the doctor? Julia asked. She told me she'd saved my life, that I could start over, have a normal family, children. 10 years have passed and I still believe her. Oh, granddaughter, I don't know, sighed the old woman. I was going on vacation, I thought, for the last time in my life at sea. And you're interrogating me. I have no idea what happened between you and the doctor, but the baby was good, even though it took so long to come out. But that doctor said the boy wouldn't survive, said the young woman, that he wouldn't make it to the morning. And if he did, I'd be in a lot of trouble and no life. Look, I'm old, but my memory is clear, said Landa. I don't remember your son having any problems. You see, if the baby had been complicated, they would have put him in the intensive care unit. He was in a regular room. I went in there the next day crying. How could a mother give up her son like that? He was lying there drinking milk from a bottle. He's fine, honey. He can't be. You're lying to me, Julia whispered. You're deceiving me. Me? The old woman was surprised. What for? My child, I have one foot in front of God, and the last thing I want is to deceive a stranger, especially for something like this, my own son. Landa's blood pressure had risen from worrying, and the pain was shooting to her temples. To recover a little, she took out a flask of cognac. In large quantities, it's disgusting, but in small quantities, it's a cure. She took a sip and felt the pressure in her temples ease. Now she could think further. I'm sorry, granddaughter, Landa continued. I'm sorry to tell you all this, but I warned you. What guarantee was there that two people who had been in a similar story would meet in the same compartment? By all the laws of life, we should never have crossed paths. Maybe Elizabeth deceived you. God only knows why. But if anything, I won't go anywhere. I won't testify. Don't count on me. Julia jumped to her feet and began to walk around the compartment. It was hard though. The room was too small. She took 2 steps in one direction and 2 in the other. She was no longer the dumb girl of 10 years ago. She was now an experienced, accomplished woman, and she has to come up with some kind of plan. We must make the doctor answer to the law. Julia shrieked. How can you separate children from their parents like this? It's a crime. It's inhumane. Answer, you say. She's already answering. Our doctor, sighed Blanda. Where? The young woman rejoiced. Is she already in jail? Has she done something else? Take it higher. The old woman grinned bitterly. She's answering to God. Right at his reception, God forgive her. Though she didn't like Elizabeth, her sudden death came as a surprise to the whole hospital. Hit by a car on her way home from work. The culprit was never found. It's not uncommon in Washington. How many years ago was this? 4 years, maybe. And if she was alive, she wouldn't have said anything. That's the kind of person Elizabeth is. She's all about herself. Wanda's gone, Julia whispered. How will I get justice? How will I get my child back? Landa remained silent. Having worked with mothers and their children all her life, she knew how the state cared for boys and girls. At least from a legal standpoint, if a neglectful mother didn't look for her offspring for 10 years, who would give him to her in his 11th year? Besides, to the mother who had written a voluntary relinquishment of her child, Landa was about to give the same cynical advice: find a man and have more children. But suddenly she had a better idea. And let's drink tea. Grandma smiled slyly. I don't know you at all. The midwife thought that if Julia made a good impression on her, she would tell her what to do. After all, there was one option to at least make sure that the boy really was all right after birth. This whole thing is nothing short of providence, Julia thought, stirring the sugar in her cup. What were the chances she'd end up in the same compartment as the woman who delivered her baby 10 years ago? Especially as she decided to go to the seaside just before the trip. And that midwife, if you say A, say B. But no, she decided to have a feast in this heat. Tea on the train as always, Julia said, just to keep the conversation going. You can't drink it. Only if you pour it out the window. Yes, agreed the old lady, taking a sip. It's not strong enough. Although in this heat, it can be a plus. Why did I write a refusal? Thought Julia, and she felt heavy and nauseous. So what? A boy with peculiarities. Unless, of course, the doctor was lying. But now he'd be with me. Do you know what the most frustrating thing is? Julia asked. That snide, you'll have another baby. Thing the doctor said to me. Not the doctor's lady. It was like those words were imprinted somewhere in the subcortex of my brain. You shouldn't take on a burden. Oh, son, I didn't even give the boy a name. Did you want a baby? The midwife continued her interrogation over a cup of tea. Me? The young woman shuddered. Yes, I did. Very much. Then why did you agree with Elizabeth? The old woman was surprised. Because I wasn't ready, Julia sighed. I realized that now in my 30s. It was as if everything was against me then. That boy's father was, but he was gone. He promised to marry, but he cheated. I was all alone. No money, no place to live. And when she told me that the boy was no good, that I could give up, I was tempted. Very strong. How did you get on? Landa asked. I lived well, the young woman replied. I went to law school and worked in a big firm. Then I went into it. Where did you go? The old lady asked suspiciously. Well, information technology, Julia explained. Internet telephones. Then a few years later she got married. It wasn't very successful, but still. If I got pregnant now, my child would have everything. Within reason, of course. But then, 10 years ago. Landa fought the suspicion that was consuming her from within. On the one hand, she would have liked to trust this woman for looking so young and beautiful. On the other hand, where had she been for a whole 10 years? Not once had she even tried to find out what had happened to her son. Whether he was alive or dead, who was she to judge? Just an old midwife with one foot in the grave. And to get that thought away from her, she runs 1,000 kilometers to the sea. To get away like it's the last time. Or rather, the last time. Maybe God organized this meeting so that she could write down one more good deed in her record. Maybe it's not enough to get her into heaven. I know who will help you, sighed the elderly midwife. We used to have a head nurse. Such a thorough woman, well, so attentive. I bet she's got it all written down. Really? Said the woman with the Vanda. Is she really going to help me find the boy? I don't know, Grandma admitted, but we must hurry. Why? Julia asked. First of all, the documents have a shelf life of just 10 years, explained Landa. Then they'll be written off, and that's it. And secondly, Sarah's retiring. She's 5 years younger than me, and she's been holding out until the last minute, but she's giving up anyway. That's the way it is. It's a good thing I'm out of that nasty tea. I'd given up drinking it. The midwife remembered she'd phoned Sarah and asked her to go to the seaside with her. The head nurse told me honestly that she had money like a beggar now, that people had called her the other day and introduced themselves as employees of an honest bank. They make her write some statements, go somewhere and put bills in the terminal. They promised that she'd be rewarded for her participation in some secret operation and cheated out of her life savings. Sarah wasn't desperate, of course, but she was still destitute in her old age. Her voice was drooping and her health was failing. Now she was going to retire, sell her apartment on the outskirts of Washington and move to the country. But her traveling companion didn't need to know all that. Thank you, Julia said, wiping away her tears. Thank you for telling me all this. I'm really relieved. It's like I've gone back in time. It's like I've seen things through different eyes. Maybe I can still make up for my mistake. God willing, smiled Landa. Don't get too comfortable with vandals. It's been 10 years after all. The boy has been growing up, living somewhere, socializing with someone. He's probably been in foster care for a long time. I'll call Sarah, put in a good word, but don't mention us anywhere. None of us are going to the police or the courts. They announced one of the stops, and Julia rushed for the exit. It was a good thing she had not brought a huge suitcase, but a small purse. She could run with it. She wrote her name and phone number on a piece of paper and left it with a casual acquaintance. It seemed to Julia that the train had not traveled far from the capital in 3 hours. But in fact, it took her much longer to get home. The sea, the sun, and the fruit were now far away, and Julia had only one thought in her mind: to find out which family her son had been given to see him, even from afar, make sure the boy was okay. And then what? She had no answer to that question. Overcoming fear, disgust, and other heavy feelings, Julia entered the main building of the hospital, the same one where she had experienced betrayal, pain, and the loss of her child. Nothing had changed in 10 years. Only the then fresh renovations had taken their toll. Now the maternity hospital looked ugly. The walls were weathered, the floors worn. The plastic doors now looked cheap, as if they had been bought to save money. But there was a vanda for a speedy restoration of grandeur. Right in the courtyard of the hospital stood the booths harbingers of the coming renovation. Landa actually called her the following afternoon, complaining that the sun was giving her a bad headache. Prices had skyrocketed, and she could hardly afford to eat in the dining room, that she was now lying in her boarding house room and could hardly move her lips after all that sun and food. But she contacted Sarah and put in a good word. You go to the 5th building, her former midwife told her. There to the right of the entrance there is an inconspicuous office with a plywood door. By patronymic, you will find my acquaintance. Introduce yourself. She'll tell you everything, I guarantee it. She's never let me down. Julia took with her a box of expensive chocolates, a bottle of champagne. What else do head nurses like? Probably should have gotten her some nice coffee. The young woman entered the building wearing a mask and disposable gloves, but the precautions seemed to have been forgotten here. Many visitors were coughing and sneezing without even thinking of covering their faces with their hands. What masks? In the 5th building, in the same plywood office, sat a grandmother even more decrepit than Landa. The skin on her hands was completely transparent, all the vessels visible. Her eyes looked as if they were shrouded in a haze. In addition, Sarah's head was shaking violently. She nodded to her guest, accepted the gifts, and pointed to a chair. 10 years, grandmother said and coughed. I had to run around the archives, breathe the dust. It's not a bad thing, I'll tell you. I beg your pardon, was all Julia said. I really needed it. Don't apologize, the head nurse waved her hand. I have one last week of work left. I don't get assigned anything anymore. I'm just walking around doing nothing. And what about breathing dust? I've been doing it all my life. And nothing. I'll go to the country, I'll live. And Sarah began to list all the advantages of country life. She shared her grandiose plans for planting and building a veranda with a toilet and a shower. Like the postman, is just starting to lick in retirement. Then she suddenly started coughing, and she did it so long and hard that the guest was frightened. Would you like some water? Julia asked. Or should I call a doctor? Grandmother only waved her hands. For a while she gathered her strength and did some sort of breathing exercises. The blood vessels under the transparent skin became so bright that it looked scary. But after a while, Grandma was back to normal, if that's the right word for it. I'll tell you this, wheezed the old lady after a couple minutes. I didn't believe Landa at first. She told me your story from the sick. But Elizabeth took the documents. I couldn't remember that day at once. 10 years had passed. I'm not Landa. She has a memory like your computer. Then I remembered. It's true. Elizabeth took your card, and she told me that a long time ago. She said I had to hand over the papers. So I did. Julia's mood immediately sank. The paperwork was taken by the doctor, who convinced her to give up the baby. And she died. That's it, the end of the line. Now she'll never know where her baby is or if he's alive. So what's left? Should we go to the police? Tell the story on social media. What a nightmare, Julia said and cried. It seemed her boy had slipped through her fingers a second time. On top of that, the grandmother started coughing again. She kept trying to tell her something, but the spasms choked her throat. The old lady drank some water, took a few deep breaths, but she still managed to pull herself together only after a few minutes. The documents she had ordered her to bring to the office then, Sarah continued. For safekeeping, or for some kind of article, I don't remember. She never gave me the card back. I kept reminding her. But she is not responsible for anything. According to the magazine, the card was still mine, and I didn't want to end up in the investigator's office and blush. So I made copies before I handed it over, like I knew it. They were in the archive. I couldn't find them. I hid them myself. Julia's mood immediately turned 180 degrees. The tears dried up by themselves, and a smile appeared on her face. Looking at her, the old woman cheered up too. She stopped coughing altogether and even smiled. Still, it's been 10 years. Just the shelf life. They could have been destroyed, of course, if I hadn't taken them, said the head nurse. And of course, I have no right to give them to you. Why not? The young woman asked in a parched voice. It's my card, isn't it? Yours. But there's a waiver, the grandmother explained. These are our laws. Such a book can be requested either by an investigator or a court. You realize that such truths bounce off my teeth like the Our Father. Julia's mind was again filled with sad thoughts. Fate was giving her a chance to deal with the worst thing that had ever happened to her. Now what? Would she have to talk this old lady down? Explain to her why this is so important? Or go to the police? Write a statement with a vague hope that they would sort it out? It was already beyond Julia's strength. I really need this, she said. I have no right to give it away, of course, Grandma continued. But they are copies, not originals. But what can we do? We only live once. Some people's God-given time is running out. Besides, Landa asked for you so much, so much. I'll be very grateful, Julia said. I'll pay." "I don't want your money," sighed the head nurse. She remembered how recently unscrupulous crooks had left her penniless. "Let's make a deal. If you find your son, if you can talk to him, buy him something from me. I don't want a penny of your money, you hear me?" On the way home, Julia wanted to look at the documents and understand what had really happened 10 years ago. But she was afraid she would lose her senses, someone would find the card, and the nurse would be in trouble. She struggled to get home and open the document. The boy was born healthy. No abnormalities were detected. Here is also her statement, written in a trembling hand after childbirth, about the abandonment of the child. That's all. Having carefully studied the card, Julia realized that again she had come to a dead end. At the end, there was a note that the boy had been adopted. Soon after the birth, just a few months later, they'd given him a new name, changed his middle name and date of birth. A conscientious nurse scrupulously glued all this to the cardboard. In despair, the young woman shook the cardboard and a piece of paper, folded 4 times, fell out. A document that completely changed the situation and greatly reduced the field for future searches. Arriving at the unfamiliar address, Julia tried to gather her thoughts. What would she say to these people? "Hello, Mr. Wesley, do you have my son? May I meet him and talk to him?" At best, they would call the police, at worst the ambulance crew. The young woman rented a car, parked in the driveway, and waited. In the card, somehow unbelievable, was a copy of the court decision on adoption. It's impossible to understand, because this document is almost secret. It should not be given to anyone except the adoptive parents and those who make changes to the documents. Her son was given not only a name and patronymic, but even a different date and place of birth, and he was adopted before he was a year old. The house where her son lived was a high-end building. Only 5 floors, huge front door, its own green space, ample parking, and no one drives in from other yards because the lot is enclosed by some kind of fence. No renovation, no densification has affected this sliver of a crumbling empire. Her son's new parents must be well-to-do and wealthy. Julia stood for several hours, but during that time, no one who even vaguely resembled a boy of 10 came out of the entrance. Evening had come. It was dark in the windows where apartment 12 should have been, and no one had lit the lights. The woman got tired of waiting and got out of the car. Her legs and back were stiff from sitting for so long, but to go to the intercom and press the right apartment was beyond her strength. She hesitantly approached the entrance. After a couple of minutes, the door opened wide. "Yeah, you got me." "Who are you looking for?" the dandelion-headed grandmother asked her sternly. She stood on the threshold of the former lake house and eyed the stranger with suspicion. Her hair had faded from age and looked like snow. Wrinkled skin, some ridiculous white dress. Seeing her, Julia was frightened and even recoiled. How unexpectedly she appeared. "Hello," said the woman, overcome with fear and disgust. I'm looking for the Weasleys. I just forgot which apartment they live in. You've been standing here for 6 hours," the old woman announced to her. 6. If you say another word, I'll call the police. Or the NKVD. Do you hear? People like you should be put up against the wall. "Please calm down," Julia asked. "I really don't mean any harm, and I've done you no harm. You see, the Weasley son." "Oh, that bastard," grandmother shrieked. "Always breaking things, hitting things. It was right that they put him in an orphanage. That's right." Immediately, the house was as good as new. "He's got his strength right away." "An orphanage?" The young woman was surprised. "Yeah," nodded the grandmother. "Such people should go straight to a colony or an orphanage. This is a criminal, a real criminal. He set fire to my door. Can you believe it?" "Where's Weasley now?" Julia asked. "They've gone away from here," the old woman replied. "They went in different directions. About 3 years ago, I can't tell you exactly." "Why do you want to know, huh?" Maybe you want to rob their apartment. I'll tell you right away, don't waste your time. It's a poor place, I saw it myself. They only pretend to be equal to us natives. In reality, they barely scraped together the money for that apartment and ran away. Well, that's good, that's great. It's quiet now, and their jalopy stopped blowing smoke through my windows. Thank you, Julia said. I should be going. But the old woman didn't seem to hear her. She continued shouting all over the yard about how unlucky her neighbors were. How they got me with their scandals, complained Grandma. First they yelled at each other, and then that shameless gob showed up. One day, can you believe it? The Immaculate Conception. They started yelling at the boy, but he couldn't keep up either. The walls were moving. Every day, I complained, I wrote. But it was no use. I really have to go, said the young woman and went to the car. Don't come here again, the grandmother shouted after her. If I see you again, I'll slash your tires and scratch your body. I'll call the NKVD. They'll take you to their place, understand? Don't mess with me. Moving along the evening streets, Julia thought how strange life is organized. Turns out her son lived in the same town as her. Maybe they even walked the same streets, bumped into each other on the subway, or she'd smile at him when she saw the boy concentrating. Now it's like he's running away, slipping away. If he ends up in an orphanage, what happens to him now? How do we find him? Sam, hi, Julia said hello, calling her old acquaintance. She knew for sure that he worked for the police, but not in detail. Can you meet me? Well, if it's okay with my husband, the man answered. He doesn't mind, the woman said wryly. He doesn't care anymore. He and I broke up 6 months ago. Didn't I tell you? Oh, said Sam, I'm sorry. Why did you bring me up so late? Sam, I have a case, Julia continued. I need your help. Can you make time for me? Oh, please. There was shouting from outside the principal's office door. Once again, the older teacher was trying to call one of the students to order. He seems to be a smart and intelligent boy, studying well, but his behavior and his categorical attitude. You've got to beat the crap out of him if you want him to do any good. Your mother abandoned you. Abandoned. Wanda said it in that nasty, squeaky voice of hers. The state's all you got left, you hear? You should be grateful to us, Tom. And you, what about you? Yes, Wanda, answered the pupil quietly. No wonder, do you hear? The woman was indignant. You're supposed to call me Mrs. Principal, understand? Say it again. Yes, Mrs. Director, exhaled the boy. Dismissed? Wanda waved her hand. I have urgent business. Otherwise, we would have continued your education. If you run away again, I'll make it a question, do you hear me? I will. Get smart before it's too late. The door closed behind the stubborn pupil. This time, he didn't even say his trademark saying, I'll be out of your hair sooner or later. 10 years old and so formidable. However, in her career, the principal has met a lot more than that. We have to fight these attitudes, otherwise all the kids will start to scatter. Where does he keep running off to? He has no one. The birth mother refused. The foster parents had their custody removed by the court. No grandparents, no living soul, and he's only 10 years old. She'll have to take care of him for almost as long, unless she got promoted, of course. But she believed in the best. She would become an official in the Ministry of Education. Come in, Wanda called out. Now in her office was a nice and even pretty woman. How old is she? Probably under 30. And what was she doing in their orphanage? Hello, said the applicant. Thank you for taking me in. Well, not yet accepted. We need to interview, said the principal absent-mindedly. We need a lawyer and also a specialist in procurement on a part-time basis and an accountant a little bit. And all this on one rate. It's a lot of work, my dear. Yes, I read the terms and conditions, nodded the young woman. The work is familiar to me. Everything is clear. I've been in procurement for 5 years. 1S, of course, used a little, but I'll get the hang of it. In principle, everything suits me. Even the salary. Wanda was surprised. This place was Julia's weak plan. Indeed, what she, a successful lawyer and manager, forgot in this orphanage. She could not think of a good reason. Her only hope was one weak tactical move. They say you have a dormitory, Julia began. Yes, we do, Wanda nodded, and we can register you there. No problem. I'm so tired of renting these apartments, the woman continued. Then I have to drive all the way across town to work. I understand, said the principal. The dormitory is over there. You can see it from the window. We've recently renovated it. There's a room with a private bathroom, by the way. You'll live there alone, like a queen. But we'll make a contract with this, as it is. Temptation. You mean, with a trial? Julia clarified. That's it, exactly, nodded Wanda. Because, you know, one of them got a contract, signed it, and then couldn't kick her out. She was a lawyer. She just didn't want to work. But our clever girl attacked the wrong people. I'm not threatening, no, I'm warning. The women were silent. Julia thought it was a dubious pleasure to work in this place. The salary on her resume was a pittance. She'd gotten much more in her previous position, and there were prospects. But that didn't matter now. As soon as she typed in the name of the orphanage, she immediately saw the address of the employment site. It was like a clue. Julia sent her resume, and the same day she received a response. The list of duties, of course, could scare an impressionable person. But the woman was an experienced employee. She'd be fine, wouldn't she? I could open the cards right away, continued Wanda. For a month our vacancy has been hanging, not a single response. I've already told my assistant to redo it, to make it more intriguing. Consider that you have found an employee, hastened to reassure her applicant. I have all the documents with me. I can even start tomorrow. No problems, believe me. The woman was silent, looking intently at her interlocutor. Smart, beautiful, and with such a wonderful workbook. No, something was obviously wrong here. Or was it the work in the orphanage that changed Wanda so much? Yeah, she's looking for a catch. And the lady, maybe she just likes boys and girls. We should give her a chance, but be safe. I'll hire you, but on one condition, said the principal, and you have to start early, that's right. The sooner the better. Yes, nodded the applicant. What other condition? The principal smiled slyly. The condition was strange, but it suited Julia. Working at the orphanage was the most challenging job Juliet had ever had. The position of a lawyer entailed so many duties that a whole department could hardly cope with them. There were contracts, references, endless databases, and much more. Fortunately, she was able to organize her work, so she could quickly get things going. Still, it was a lot of hard work. It was worth falling out of this rhythm just for a day, and tomorrow we'll have to make even more effort. Then there was the sheer number of children, which was hard for her to look at, and the strange rules in the orphanage. For example, the children were forbidden to run around, and to talk loudly, to shout. It's like a prison for children, Julia thought, looking at the battered faces of the kids. Only they didn't do anything. Volunteers and officials came to the orphanage all the time. They spoke nice words to the children, gave them gifts. But Julia saw that what the children needed was something completely different. They could not be bought off with a new phone or a tablet. Each one of them needed a family. Her son was in here somewhere. She certainly couldn't have done it without Sam's help. Of course, she wouldn't let him in on the details of the events. He didn't need to know what she needed the boy for. He didn't show any curiosity, though. He found the child, and that's fine. The woman easily found his file, looked at the photos. Yeah, that boy's had a tough life, and his face looks more like Max than her. But she knew he was her soulmate right away, and she'd seen him a few times, but from a distance. She'd have to figure out how to get closer, how to become his friend. It is possible There is nothing impossible in the world. She was pulled out of her thoughts by a phone call. "Julia, come in," came the demanding voice in the receiver. "Please come in for a moment." Strangely enough, she liked the principal. The first impression of this imperious person was deceptive. She quickly saw that beneath the mask of an indifferent official was an intelligent and empathetic woman. Just how good could she be to each of these children and adults, especially since many of them had very difficult personalities? "Hello, dear," the principal smiled at her. "You've been with us for 2 weeks now. You know, not every lawyer has been here this long. Do you need any help?" "Thank you," Julia replied. "Work is work. Tell me what needs to be done." "I'm on fire in there." "Oh yeah," said the boss. "You know, you and I are not just in an institution, but in a real orphanage. And we need to find an approach to each child, you know. That's why the state hired us. We have such an institution as mentoring." What? Julia was surprised. "Do I still have to tutor children?" "Mentoring is our know-how," Wanda said enthusiastically. "Not some kind of socially useful work, but paid labor. You're working so hard, I thought, why don't you offer? I'll throw in an extra $5,000 a month. I don't think these kids need parents. It's too late for them, too late. Friends and mentors are different. You know, to teach you how to live, to tell you how to pay the rent and all that." "I'm just a lawyer," Julia shrugged. "You know how to help these kids." "Yes, you're an excellent lawyer," smiled the principal. "To be honest, my dear, I doubt that you will stay with us for a long time. But your opportunities should be used wisely. Even if it's only for a month, but some pupil will get important experience." "Yes, the paperwork was badly neglected," the young woman said. "I have already studied more of my scope of work and solved the most pressing issues. I, of course, will not be easy to restore a lot of things. Here, for example, on the logs and reports." "Wait," Wanda interrupted her. "I don't understand anything about your legal side of things. I'd like it in writing and with figures, but later. Right now, I'd like you to agree to be a mentor. To teach some of the pupils how to live, you know." With difficulty, Julia admitted. "I've found something for everyone here," the teacher admitted. "My driver runs a sort of hobby group. He tells the boys how the car works, what pedals to press. The superintendent has formed a whole squad. The kids help him fix things, paint things. You're a busy man. You can hardly take on more than one pupil." "I don't know." Julia stretched out. "We have one difficult boy," said the principal. "He's always trying to run away. He can't explain where he's going or why. It would be great if you could take care of him. Not for nothing, of course. It would be good for you too. You're going to have kids too." "What's his name?" the young woman asked hopefully. "This pupil?" "Gob Weasley," Wanda answered. "Julia, are you all right? You look pale, my dear." "Do not be afraid. He is a very good and adequate boy. He just needs attention and care. As much as anyone, really. Julia, are you sure you're okay?" Wanda was basically a good woman, and the story of Gob, the fugitive loser, resonated in her heart with an incomprehensible pain. But any attempt to find out the boy's background seemed to hit an invisible barrier. Who his parents were, why they refused was a mystery. Gob's birth records, lost due to relocation. Gob's civil adoption file has been lost due to a heating system failure. No materials can be recovered. Wanda was particularly disturbed that the boy had been abandoned twice. First by his biological parents, and then by his adoptive parents. And it wasn't that the child was completely hopeless. No, it was just that all the kids who ended up in the orphanage at a relatively mature age suffered from it. Now he's 10 years old, the principal pondered. Who will take him in? Who will bring him up? Of course, there were volunteers and professionals in the country who could take on such a burden, but they are few and far between. And she, Wanda, was shunned, considered a bureaucrat and a cynic. That was her outer shell, thanks to which she made a successful career. But deep down, the principal empathized with every boy and girl under her charge. A couple times a week, she called a boy to her office and tried to communicate with him. But there was no trust between them. She couldn't break the barrier. Wanda tried different methods, but it was a dead end. Looking at the new lawyer, she thought the woman could be the key to this boy. A lockpick. Normally Gob spoke to her politely and courteously, but the experienced teacher could see that deep down he didn't agree with anything. And when provoked, he showed his true colors. He'd say mean things without hesitation. If he keeps this up, he's going to have a problem with the pupil. "I'm gonna get out of here anyway," Gob told her when he lost his temper. "I'm gonna run away." "Where are you running to?" the principal questioned. "You don't have anybody. You don't have anybody. You need to realize that this is your home now, and you have to do what you're asked to do." "You just won't let me find my home," the boy objected. "Everybody's got grandmothers, aunts. I'll run outside the fence and look for it, and I'll find it, do you hear?" "Over the fence," thought Wanda with annoyance. No, she would never be able to turn this institution into a real home. It wouldn't do any good if she didn't. Otherwise, they'd just keep looking at her like she was the enemy. Gob is a perfect illustration of what's to come. What are these guys gonna make? "All right, I've got an idea," Wanda said. "You're supposed to be good in social studies, aren't you? You're reading all kinds of books. I think you're even trying to write something." "Well," the boy nodded. "I love it. Why?" "There's a new lawyer," the principal explained. "A good specialist, but it's hard for her. She can't cope. She doesn't understand what an orphanage is. Why don't you help her?" "But it's our little secret." "Help?" Gob asked, and there was interest in his voice instead of aggression. "Yeah," Wanda nodded. "Don't tell her she's not doing well, okay? It'll be our secret. Do what she says, and you watch yourself, get some experience. When you grow up, you'll have to make a living, won't you?" "Yes," the boy agreed. He had already calmed down, and there was excitement in his eyes. "Of course, it's too early for me to think about choosing a specialty. But I wouldn't rule out law. My father was a lawyer." Wanda wanted to say he didn't have a father anymore, but some kind of bridge had been built with the stubborn boy. So she just smiled and told him to be ready. Any day now he would have to start work and help the lawyer. The little boy believed it. Julia couldn't believe her happiness. Coincidence after coincidence. Would she really be trusted to spend time with her own son? When Julia first saw Gob up close, something stirred in her heart. The boy really looked neglected. He looked like a bush that grew on its own. His hair was ridiculous. His pants were short. His shirt, on the other hand, was 3 sizes too big. He wiped his nose every now and then. "There, Gob, I found you a friend," Wanda said. "I'm fine on my own," he said, but he looked at Julia with interest. "Don't be silly," said the principal. "Man is a social animal. That's why you have to reach out to other people, you know." Gob remained silent. Julia continued to look at him, trying to find familiar features. Her nose, I think, and her chin too. Skinny, dark eyes like Max's. And she's not smiling at all. "Leave us alone, will you?" Julia asked. "Of course," replied Wanda. "Let's go to my office," the young woman suggested. They walked down the corridor, and Julia tried to gather her thoughts. What next? What should she do with this child? What to offer? Her heart told her to make contact. "Are you all alone here?" she asked. "My parents abandoned me when I was 7, the boy sighed. "I've never seen them again. There are no other relatives. No one comes." There was resentment in Gob's voice. He blamed the whole world, and no one in particular, for his troubles. The boy's adult thoughts somehow frightened the lawyer. She thought she had to calm him down. But how? "I sympathize with you," Julia said. "And it would be fine if they just put him in an orphanage." Gob continued with resentment in his voice. "No, they just dumped the whole truth on me. They said you were adopted. Here. For the record, I considered both my mom and dad my family. I've lived with them as long as I can remember. They didn't even visit me once. They didn't explain. At least they left me my name and surname." "What a nightmare," said the young woman, and tears ran down her cheeks. "Don't look at how beautiful it is," the boy said. "This place is scary. Everyone here is in groups, in camps, and everyone is against each other. I mean the kids. But something tells me it's the same with adults." "Who are you with?" Julia asked. "I'm on my own," the boy explained. "I read books, I like that. No one goes to the library but me for books." "Gob," said the woman and took the child's hand. "If you want, we can be friends." "Thank you," he replied, taking her hand. "That's what everyone says. Only you will go away. Leave me. You are nothing to me. Come on, show me what needs to be done here. Cindy told me to help." "Cindy?" Julia was surprised. "Yeah," the boy nodded. "That's what we call her around here. And it's not the most offensive nickname yet, believe me." "Just observe for now," the woman suggested. "I don't know what you can do. She says you'll make a great assistant. Is that true?" "I have no idea," the boy admitted. Gob liked to take offense. In such a state, it was easier for him to accept his position and also to feel better and more worthy. Until the age of 7, he was an ordinary boy, went to kindergarten, then to school. He lived with his parents, who were devoted to him. But then life started to fall apart. Mom and Dad fought all the time and couldn't share anything. It's all about Mom. She's a real tyrant. She had the whole family in her fist. Dad could only give her a nod or hide somewhere to pretend that he was very busy and had urgent matters. And though Mom was rude and quick to retaliate, he didn't know any other. And when she wasn't yelling, she wasn't a bad woman. Gob tried his best to cheer her up. And then the worst happened. In the heat of the moment, Dad told her that his son was actually adopted. Adopted. The kid didn't even understand the meaning of the word. And then he found out that somewhere on Earth, his real mom and dad were walking around. Relationships broke down, and then his parents abandoned him. At the age of 8, Gob found himself in an orphanage. He used to have his own room, toys, pocket money, and friends. Now he had to share a room with 3 other kids. It was as if everyone here was angry with each other. The principal and the teachers, no matter how hard they tried, couldn't settle absolutely all the conflicts. "They are so helpless," said Gob Tony to a boy whom he had at first considered a friend. "They can't do anything on their own. Everything in life is different. You have to achieve everything. And here, nobody knows how to do anything." Gob got a beating for that. That's how he learned he couldn't trust anyone at the orphanage. He also realized that he had to run away, to try to find his real parents, and if he couldn't find his mom and dad, then at least a grandmother, aunt, or uncle. For some reason, he was sure they had to be somewhere for sure. "Gob, you have no one," the principal said, and in her voice he could hear anger and dislike. "You're all alone. Everybody's given up on you." "I'll get out of here anyway," he replied. "Someday I will." And he ran away again and again. He was brought back. How far can a little boy with no money and no family go? But when Julia came to work, Gob felt, for the first time in his life, that someone needed him, that he was valuable and important, and his opinion was being sought. "Let's go to the movies," the mentor suggested in the second week of their acquaintance. "There's a new cartoon playing. You want to go?" Cindy would never let go, Gob replied, wiping his nose with his hand. But Wanda did. She only warned Julia not to lose sight of the boy, not even for a minute. "We find him if he ran away," the principal said. "But you keep an eye on him, all right? Oh, God willing, he'll get better." "Julia, sit down," Wanda said with a smile. "Sit down, you're my gold." Julia looked at her current boss with suspicion. Yes, she liked her right away, with her education and experience. But this praise was clearly not about her main job, but about something else. There was a teapot on the principal's desk, a sure sign of the importance of the conversation. And good Belgian chocolate, marshmallows, and other healthy sweets. Julia didn't eat them, except for a small piece of chocolate bar. "Hello," said the young woman. "I don't know why I'm so deserving of your attention." You do. The principal brightened up. "It's about Gob. Shall we have a cup of tea? We've got a long talk to have." Julia was frightened. Had Wanda dug up something and now she knew more? Or had some paper from the police come in? No, I don't think the reception would have been so cordial then. It was definitely something else. "Gob's a good boy," Julia said. "I can't say he helps me. He's more of a hindrance. But when he's around, it's so peaceful, you know. And light." "Exactly," nodded the principal. "You like our dormitory, don't you? I can give you not a room, but a whole block." "Thank you," the young woman replied. "But I wouldn't want to get used to it. I hope to have an apartment and a family." Did you know that guardians can get social housing? Wanda decided to play her trump card, and it can even be privatized someday. "Of course, I'm a lawyer," Julia shrugged. "But an alien child is such a responsibility." "I've already thought of everything," said the principal. She was beginning to lose her patience. "I've got the paperwork ready. Gob is your baby. Your baby. Julia, are you all right?" The young woman turned pale. How did she know? Should I open up to her? Thoughts ran frantically through Julia's mind. But while she remained silent, Wanda herself continued to speak. "You don't be afraid of anything. We will help you. Yes, it's rare for children this old to be placed with families. Rarely. But the more valuable is my experiment." The principal has a steely tone in her voice. People like that, they follow through at all costs. And she'd already imagined how the example of her lawyer will take a worthy place in the report at the next conference. The most dignified. "So you want me to get custody of Gob?" Julia asked. She had gotten over herself, and her voice wasn't shaking. "Exactly," the principal replied. "I agree," she exhaled. "Gob is like family to me." "Yeah, well, he is family." Wanda brightened. On this occasion, she wanted to open the safe, take out a bottle of champagne, and pop the cork in the air. But she held back. No, thought the principal. Let it last at least 6 months. Then we'll open champagne and cognac. Yes, there's absolutely no hurry.